You've been lied to about letting go. They told you it means giving up, that it means you stop trying, that if you release something, you didn't care enough. But if that were true, why does holding on feel so heavy? Why does forcing control drain your energy? Why do you keep replaying the same thoughts, hoping they'll finally bring peace? The truth is simple. Letting go is not giving up. It's trusting life. It's trusting that not everything is yours to carry, trusting that some things end so something deeper can begin. Buddhist wisdom has taught this for centuries, not as surrender to weakness, but as freedom from suffering. The Buddha never asked you to escape life. He taught you how to stop fighting it. As you listen to these lessons, your grip will begin to soften. Your breath will slow, and the quiet tension you've been living with will start to dissolve. You'll realize that peace doesn't come from control. It comes from acceptance, from allowing life to unfold without demanding guarantees. This is not about quitting. This is not about becoming passive. This is about releasing what no longer serves you, so life can move through you freely. This isn't just a lesson. It's an invitation to trust the flow of life, to stop resisting change, and to discover the calm that appears when you finally let go. Are you ready? Let's begin. Before we go deeper, pause for a moment and notice the quiet urge inside you that wants clarity right away. The mind reaches forward almost automatically, searching for certainty, structure, something solid to lean on. That urge doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It reveals something important. It shows how deeply the need for control is woven into the way we try to feel safe. The moment peace becomes dependent on control, suffering begins quietly. Not loudly, not in a way that draws attention, but in subtle forms that blend into everyday life. It hides inside responsibility, ambition, discipline, and even success. Many people live with it for years without naming it, because from the outside, everything looks fine. But inside, there is pressure, a constant sense of holding things together. Control usually starts as protection. Early in life, you learn that effort leads to results, that planning reduces risk, that staying alert prevents mistakes. Slowly, this turns into a belief that if you manage things well enough, life will stop surprising you. This belief feels practical, even mature. It gives the illusion of stability. But stability built on control is fragile because life is not designed to obey plans. When life does not cooperate, the mind does not soften. It tightens. It thinks more, plans more, analyzes more. It tries to outsmart uncertainty. And this tightening is where anxiety is born. Not always panic, not always fear, but a low-level tension that never fully goes away. A background noise of unease that follows you even during good moments. Many people mistake this tension for motivation. They believe constant vigilance is the price of success. They believe if they relax, things will fall apart. So they stay mentally active even when nothing is wrong. Their bodies remain on alert. Their minds rarely rest. Peace becomes conditional, postponed until everything is under control, which never truly happens. From a Buddhist view, this is suffering created by attachment, not to objects, but to outcomes. You become attached to how things should unfold. When reality deviates, the mind interprets it as a personal failure or a threat. The pain does not come only from what happens, but from resisting the fact that it happened. This resistance is exhausting. It creates a second layer of suffering on top of the first. There is the event itself, and then there is the struggle against accepting it. Most people spend far more energy on the second part. They replay, regret, and rehearse. They argue with reality long after it has moved on. Control also shapes how you relate to time. The present moment becomes something to manage rather than experience. You are rarely fully here because your attention is always slightly ahead, preparing, adjusting, correcting. Even joy is monitored, even rest feels earned, fragile, and temporary. Over time, control becomes identity. You start seeing yourself as the one who handles things, who stays composed, who anticipates problems. This identity feels strong, but it comes with a hidden cost. Any situation you cannot manage begins to threaten how you see yourself. Uncertainty becomes personal. Letting go feels like losing value. This is why many people cling to control even when it hurts. The mind equates control with worth. Releasing it feels like failure, even when it brings relief. The nervous system has learned that vigilance equals safety, so stillness feels unfamiliar, even dangerous. Anxiety thrives in this environment. It feeds on the belief that something must be done right now to prevent discomfort later. Thoughts become repetitive. Scenarios loop. The mind tries to solve problems that may never arrive. This activity feels useful, but it rarely creates peace. It keeps you busy, not calm. Buddhist teachings point to impermanence as the root of this struggle. Everything changes, whether you approve or not. Bodies age, emotions shift, relationships evolve, circumstances turn. Control attempts to deny this truth. It tries to freeze life at a tolerable moment, but life resists being frozen. When you cling to stability, change feels like loss. Even natural transitions feel threatening. The mind interprets movement as danger because it disrupts predictability. Suffering increases not because change is harmful, but because resistance is constant. Letting go of control does not mean abandoning care or responsibility. It means releasing the belief that responsibility guarantees outcomes. You still act, you still choose, but you stop demanding that life reward effort with certainty. This shift is subtle, but powerful. As this shift begins, anxiety changes shape. It may still arise, but it loses dominance. You begin to see anxious thoughts as attempts to control the uncontrollable. You stop treating them as instructions. You allow uncertainty without immediately trying to fix it. This creates space. In that space, the body relaxes, not because the future is secure, but because you are no longer fighting the present. Breathing becomes easier. Thoughts slow down. The constant inner monitoring softens. Control also affects relationships in quiet ways. When inner peace depends on predictability, other people become variables to manage. You may try to influence how they feel, how they respond, how close they stay. This creates tension, even when intentions are loving. Connection becomes conditional. Letting go here means allowing others to be human, not predictable. It means accepting that closeness does not come from control, but from presence. When you stop managing people for emotional safety, relationships feel lighter and more real. Trust begins to replace control. Not blind trust that everything will work out, but trust that you can meet life as it unfolds. This trust does not promise comfort, it promises resilience. You stop needing guarantees to feel okay. Life becomes less about preventing discomfort and more about responding with awareness. You feel emotions without rushing to eliminate them. You allow situations to be incomplete. You stop treating uncertainty as an emergency. The illusion of control fades through observation, not force. Each moment you notice the urge to control and choose to stay present, the grip loosens. Each time you allow life to move without interference, tension releases. This does not make life perfect. It makes it lighter. You stop bracing for impact. You stop carrying responsibilities that were never yours. You experience moments without immediately preparing for their end. Suffering decreases not because life becomes predictable, but because resistance decreases. You stop asking reality to confirm your safety before allowing yourself to rest. You stop confusing vigilance with wisdom. Peace emerges quietly when control loosens its hold. Not as an achievement, not as something earned, but as a natural state that was always there beneath the effort. As the grip on control softens, something else quietly comes into view. Beneath the planning, the vigilance, and the effort to manage life, there is often a deeper attachment that remains unseen. It is not an attachment to outcomes anymore, but to a version of yourself shaped by pain. Even when control loosens, this identity can continue to suffer. There is a strange familiarity in pain that has a story. It feels known, it feels justified, it feels personal. The mind often returns to it not because it wants to suffer, but because it believes the story protects something important. This is where letting go becomes more difficult, not because the pain is intense, but because the identity built around it feels real. Pain happens, loss happens, betrayal happens, disappointment happens. These experiences are part of being human, but suffering does not end when the event ends. Often it continues because the mind keeps the event alive through identity. The story of what happened to me becomes a lens through which everything else is seen. At first, this story feels necessary. It helps you make sense of shock. It helps you survive emotionally. It gives meaning to confusion. But over time, the story can harden. It stops being a description of the past and becomes a definition of the self. You no longer just experienced pain. You become the one who was hurt. This identity feels protective. It says, remember this, so it doesn't happen again. It says, hold on to this, so your pain is acknowledged. It says, this explains why things are difficult now. But while it promises safety, it quietly keeps wounds open. The body does not distinguish between a present threat and a remembered one. When the story is replayed, the nervous system reacts as if the event is happening again. Emotions rise. Tension returns, old fear resurfaces. This is why the pain feels fresh even years later, not because it still exists, but because it is being reactivated. Clinging to the identity that suffered often feels like honoring your experience. Letting go can feel like betrayal, as if releasing the story means saying it didn't matter. But Buddhism does not ask you to deny what happened. It asks you not to live inside it forever. There is a subtle difference between acknowledging pain and building a home inside it. One allows healing. The other extends suffering. When the story becomes identity, every new experience is filtered through it. Neutral events feel threatening. Kindness feels suspicious. Joy feels temporary or undeserved. The mind may say, this is just who I am now. It may say, I'm cautious because I was hurt. It may say, I can't trust because of what happened. These statements feel logical, but they keep the past in charge of the present. The wound becomes a reference point rather than a memory. Buddhist teachings point out that the self is not a fixed object. It is a process, changing moment by moment. When you cling to an identity shaped by pain, you freeze part of that process. You stop allowing yourself to evolve beyond the event. This freezing creates stagnation. Growth slows not because healing is impossible, but because identity resists change. The mind fears that without the story, something essential will be lost. But what is actually lost is the constant reactivation of suffering. There is also a social aspect to this identity. Stories of pain often bring validation. They explain behavior. They justify boundaries. They create understanding. Over time, this can become reinforcing. You may unconsciously return to the story because it confirms who you are to others. But validation tied to pain is fragile. It requires the pain to stay relevant. It keeps you anchored to an old version of yourself. Compassion becomes entangled with suffering, and healing feels like losing recognition. Letting go of the identity that suffered does not mean pretending you were never hurt. It means allowing the hurt to be something that happened, not something you are. This shift is subtle but transformative. When the identity loosens, emotions still arise, but they pass more freely. Sadness comes and goes. Anger arises and dissolves. You stop feeding them with narrative. You experience feelings without attaching them to a permanent self. The mind may resist this at first. It may ask, if I'm not the one who was hurt, then who am I? This question can feel unsettling, but it opens space. In that space, something new becomes possible. Without the story constantly running, attention returns to the present. Sensations become clearer. Moments feel less filtered. You begin responding to life as it is, not as it once was. This does not erase memory. It changes relationship. Buddhism teaches that clinging is the cause of suffering, not the experience itself. When you cling to identity, you cling to continuity. You try to make the self solid, but solidity requires defense. It requires repetition. It requires reinforcement. Letting go allows fluidity. You stop needing to protect a version of yourself defined by harm. You allow yourself to be shaped by what is happening now. This brings lightness, not because life is easy, but because it is no longer burdened by constant reference to the past. The body responds to this shift. Chronic tension eases. Emotional reactions soften. The nervous system learns that the danger is no longer present. Safety is felt, not argued for. This does not happen through force. You cannot command yourself to release identity. It happens through awareness. Each time you notice the story arising and choose not to build it further, you weaken its hold. Each time you feel emotion without naming it as my wound, you loosen identification. Over time, the story loses urgency. It becomes quieter. It may still appear, but it no longer defines you. You stop introducing yourself to the world through pain, even internally. This creates room for compassion, including toward yourself. You stop judging your reactions as proof of brokenness. You see them as echoes, not truths. You meet yourself where you are without labeling yourself as damaged. Freedom grows in this space, not dramatic freedom, but simple relief. You are no longer required to carry the weight of explaining yourself through suffering. You are allowed to be present without justification. Letting go of the identity that suffered is one of the most difficult forms of release, because it feels personal. But it is also one of the most liberating. You do not lose your history. You gain your life back. As the grip on the old identity loosens, something unexpected often takes its place. The pain may no longer define you, the story may no longer run your life, yet a new pressure quietly appears. It sounds softer, even positive, but it carries its own weight. It whispers that you must now become healed, fully healed, completely free. And until you reach that state, something about you is still unfinished. There is a moment when seeking healing feels hopeful. It feels like movement, like progress. After letting go of the identity shaped by suffering, the mind naturally wants resolution. It wants a clear endpoint where everything finally feels settled. This is where the pursuit of healing can slowly turn into another form of attachment. At first, the desire to heal seems wise. You want peace, you want clarity, you want to stop reacting from old wounds. These intentions are not wrong, but when healing becomes a goal you chase, it subtly turns into a condition for self-acceptance. You begin to believe that freedom lives somewhere ahead of you, not here. This belief keeps the mind restless. You start monitoring yourself constantly. You analyze your emotions, your reactions, your thoughts, asking whether they are signs of healing or proof that you're not there yet. Every moment becomes a test. Every setback becomes evidence that something is still wrong. Buddhist wisdom points to a quiet truth here. Freedom does not come from perfecting the inner state. It comes from ending the struggle with the inner state. When healing becomes an obsession, the struggle continues under a different name. The mind says, I should be calmer by now. It says, I shouldn't still feel this. It says, if I were healed, this wouldn't bother me. These thoughts sound reasonable, but they create tension. They divide experience into acceptable and unacceptable, and where there is division, there is suffering. Non-attachment to healing does not mean rejecting growth. It means releasing the demand that growth must look a certain way. It means allowing emotions to arise without treating them as obstacles. Healing stops being a finish line and becomes a natural unfolding. Many people unknowingly turn healing into an identity. They become someone who is always working on themselves, always processing, always improving. This identity feels responsible and conscious, but it can hide a subtle form of self-rejection. The underlying message is, I am not okay as I am. This message keeps you in a constant state of fixing. Even moments of peace are questioned. You wonder if they are real or temporary. You look for signs that they might disappear. The mind never fully rests because it believes healing must be maintained. Buddhism teaches that clinging to any state, even a peaceful one, creates suffering. Inner peace cannot be held. When you try to hold it, fear appears. Fear of losing it, fear of regressing, fear of failure. This fear keeps you from fully experiencing peace when it does arise. True freedom comes when you stop measuring yourself against an ideal version of who you think you should be. When you stop asking whether you are healed enough. When you stop using future wholeness as a condition for present acceptance. Obsessing over healing also narrows attention. You become inward-focused to the point of contraction. Every feeling is examined, every reaction is dissected. Life becomes a project rather than an experience. Presence is replaced by evaluation. This evaluation often creates shame. You judge yourself for still being triggered, for still feeling sad, for still having moments of fear. You tell yourself you should know better by now. But this judgment is not wisdom. It is attachment wearing a thoughtful disguise. From a Buddhist perspective, emotions are not problems to solve. They are experiences to meet. When you allow emotions to exist without assigning them a meaning about your progress, they pass more freely. Resistance gives them weight. Acceptance gives them space. Non-attachment to healing means letting yourself be human without grading yourself. It means understanding that old patterns may arise without defining you. It means seeing that freedom is not the absence of difficulty, but the absence of resistance to difficulty. This shift changes how you relate to setbacks. Instead of seeing them as failures, you see them as movements. Instead of asking, "Why am I still like this?" you ask nothing at all. You feel what is present and let it move on its own. The mind may resist this approach because it feels passive. It fears that without effort, nothing will improve. But effort, aimed at controlling inner experience, often delays the very freedom it seeks. Peace grows in openness, not pressure. When healing is no longer a project, attention returns to life itself. You notice simple things again. Breath, sensation, sound. You engage with the world instead of constantly checking your internal state. This outward flow naturally softens inattention. Non-attachment also releases comparison. You stop measuring your journey against others. You stop asking whether you're behind or ahead. Healing becomes personal, quiet, and unforced. It unfolds at its own pace. Buddhism does not offer a final healed self to arrive at. It points to the absence of a fixed self altogether. When you see that there is no permanent you to perfect, the urgency to heal dissolves. What remains is responsiveness, not striving. This does not mean wounds never surface. They may arise unexpectedly. But when they do, they are met with curiosity rather than alarm. You do not panic about what their presence means. You allow them to pass without attaching a story. Letting go of attachment to healing also softens time. You stop postponing peace until some future version of yourself appears. You allow peace to exist alongside imperfection. This is not resignation. It is maturity. The nervous system responds to this permission. It relaxes because it no longer needs to perform. The body senses that it does not have to be different to be safe. This felt sense of safety is more healing than any technique. When you stop chasing healing, something paradoxical happens. Integration deepens. Emotional resilience grows. You respond rather than react. Not because you tried harder, but because you stopped interfering. Buddhist teachings often describe liberation as seeing clearly rather than becoming something new. When you see that the urge to heal is itself a form of grasping, the grasping loosens. You stop chasing freedom and start living it. This way of being is quieter, less dramatic. There is no moment where you declare yourself healed. There is just less struggle, less inner commentary, less urgency to arrive somewhere else. Life continues to bring challenges. Emotions still come and go, but you no longer use them as evidence against yourself. You trust the process without needing to control it. When the effort to fix yourself finally loosens, something else quietly becomes noticeable. It is not dramatic or loud. It is the subtle movement underneath everything. The rise and fall of sensations. The way moods shift without asking permission. The way moments refuse to stay still. What once felt unsettling now becomes impossible to ignore. Change has always been there, but now you are no longer distracted by trying to escape it. There is a reason impermanence feels uncomfortable to most people. From early on, the mind learns to associate stability with safety. Consistency feels reassuring. Familiar routines, familiar relationships, familiar versions of ourselves give the nervous system a sense of ground. When something changes, even slightly, the body reacts before thought catches up. Muscles tighten, breath shortens, the system prepares for loss. This reaction is not a mistake, it is learned. Over time, impermanence becomes linked with pain. Things that change often leave. People drift, feelings fade, roles end. The mind concludes that change is something to manage, resist, or delay for as long as possible. This belief shapes behavior quietly but powerfully. You may notice how often energy is spent trying to keep things the same, holding on to phases that feel good, replaying moments that are already gone, avoiding decisions because they might alter what is familiar. Even growth can feel threatening when it requires leaving something behind. Buddhist teachings place impermanence at the center, not to create fear, but to end it. Suffering does not come from change itself. It comes from expecting permanence in a world that does not offer it. When expectation clashes with reality, tension appears. The tighter the expectation, the sharper the tension. Fighting impermanence takes many forms. Sometimes it looks like clinging to relationships past their natural shape. Sometimes it looks like refusing to accept the end of a chapter. Sometimes it looks like nostalgia that quietly replaces presence. Other times it shows up as anxiety about the future, an attempt to secure what has not yet happened. The mind often treats change as loss, even when nothing has been taken away. A mood shifts and is labeled decline. A routine ends and is labeled instability. A phase closes and is labeled failure. These labels are not facts. They are interpretations shaped by attachment. Trusting impermanence means learning to see change without immediately framing it as damage. It means recognizing that movement is not betrayal. Life does not turn against you when it shifts. It is simply doing what it has always done. This trust does not appear all at once. At first it feels like uncertainty without protection. The mind wants guarantees. It wants reassurance that change will lead somewhere better. But impermanence offers no promises. It offers only movement. This is where fear often appears. Fear that what is good will not return. Fear that what is lost will not be replaced. Fear that without stability, meaning will dissolve. These fears feel real because the mind equates continuity with identity. When things change, it feels like the self is at risk. But identity itself is shaped by impermanence. Thoughts shift, beliefs evolve. The person you were years ago no longer exists in the same way. This is not tragedy. It is evidence that change is not destruction, it is transformation. When impermanence is resisted, energy is spent bracing. You hold on to moments instead of living them. You protect versions of yourself instead of allowing growth. Life becomes something to preserve rather than something to participate in. Trusting impermanence allows participation. You engage fully, knowing that nothing stays fixed. This does not make moments less meaningful. It makes them more vivid. When you stop expecting permanence, you stop taking presence for granted. Buddhism teaches that clinging turns pleasure into fear. The moment you want an experience to last, anxiety enters. You begin monitoring its duration. You become aware of its fragility. Enjoyment becomes conditional. Trusting impermanence frees pleasure from this burden. You enjoy without gripping. Loss also changes under this view. Loss still hurts, but it does not feel like punishment. It feels like completion. Something has run its course. Pain arises not because change occurred, but because attachment expected continuity. When expectation softens, grief moves more naturally. Impermanence also applies to pain. Emotions that feel permanent are not. Even intense suffering shifts when it is allowed to move. Resistance freezes pain. Acceptance allows it to change shape. Trusting impermanence means trusting that no state defines you forever. This trust reduces urgency. You stop rushing to secure happiness. You stop panicking during difficulty. You understand, not intellectually but experientially, that nothing remains static. This understanding creates steadiness, not instability. Fighting impermanence often leads to control strategies. You plan excessively. You rehearse endings before they arrive. You avoid beginnings because they imply eventual endings. Life becomes cautious and contracted. Trusting impermanence brings openness. You allow beginnings without demanding certainty. You allow endings without interpreting them as failure. You stop asking life to stay still so you can feel safe. This trust does not mean passivity. It does not mean accepting harm or avoiding responsibility. It means acting without clinging to outcomes. You respond to what is present instead of trying to freeze it. Relationships change under this understanding. You stop needing people to remain exactly as they were. You allow distance without immediately calling it loss. You appreciate connection without demanding permanence. This creates more honesty and less fear. The body also responds differently to change when impermanence is trusted. Tension decreases. The nervous system stops bracing for disruption. There is a sense of flow rather than interruption. Change becomes movement instead of threat. Time feels different as well. You stop rushing moments. You stop postponing presence. You meet experiences as they arise, knowing they will pass. This awareness deepens attention rather than diminishing it. Trusting impermanence also softens regret. Past choices are seen as part of movement, not fixed mistakes. You recognize that each decision emerged from who you were at the time. Blame loosens. Compassion grows. Fear of the future decreases, not because the future is known, but because uncertainty is no longer interpreted as danger. You stop trying to outthink life. You meet it as it unfolds. Impermanence becomes an ally because it carries everything forward. Stagnation dissolves. Emotional states shift. Circumstances evolve. You are not trapped in any moment, pleasant or painful. When you stop fighting change, energy returns. You are no longer spending it resisting reality. This energy flows into awareness, creativity, and presence. Life feels lighter, not because it is easier, but because it is no longer opposed. This trust is quiet. It does not announce itself. It shows up as flexibility, as resilience, as the ability to stay open when things move. You bend without breaking. You feel without clinging. Impermanence stops being a concept and becomes a lived truth. You see it in breath, in sensation, in thought. Nothing stays. And because nothing stays, nothing has to be held. The fear of loss softens when you see that holding never prevented loss in the first place. What it prevented was ease. What it prevented was presence. Trusting impermanence allows life to pass through you without obstruction. Moments arrive, moments leave. You remain not as a fixed self, but as awareness moving with change. There is no effort required here, no technique to master. Just a willingness to stop demanding that life remain the same so you can feel safe. Change continues, as it always has, but it is no longer treated as an enemy. It is recognized as the rhythm that carries everything forward. As trust in change settles, the mind often reaches for something familiar to hold on to. Control has loosened. Fixed identities have softened. Even the chase for healing has slowed. Yet there is still a subtle grasp that feels comforting, almost virtuous. It doesn't feel like resistance. It feels like strength. It feels like hope. Hope is usually praised as something good. It sounds gentle, encouraging, necessary. People are taught to hold on to it during difficulty, to protect it at all costs. But there is a form of hope that quietly hurts. Not because hope itself is wrong, but because of how it is used to avoid what is already here. This kind of hope does not open the heart. It tightens it. It says, this moment is not acceptable. It says, things must become different before I can rest. It says, endure now so life can begin later. Without realizing it, hope becomes a way of rejecting the present. The quiet violence of this hope is not dramatic. It doesn't look like despair. It looks like patience, like endurance, like optimism. But underneath, there is tension, a subtle refusal to be where you are, a belief that peace exists somewhere else in time. When hope turns into attachment, the present moment becomes a problem to survive rather than a reality to meet. You are always leaning forward, waiting for conditions to improve. You tell yourself things will be better when something changes, when someone changes, when you change. This creates a life that is constantly postponed. You endure today in exchange for a better tomorrow, but tomorrow keeps moving. The mind keeps resetting the condition. Happiness is always one step ahead. Buddhism does not reject hope, but it is careful with it. It recognizes that hope tied to outcome creates suffering. When hope depends on reality becoming something else, disappointment is built in. You are asking life to cooperate with your expectations before you allow yourself to be at peace. This kind of hope feels necessary because it provides meaning during pain. It gives the mind something to lean on. Without it, fear appears, fear that things might not change, fear that this is all there is. Hope becomes a shield against that fear, but shields also block contact. When you hide behind hope, you don't fully meet your experience. You don't allow grief to move through you. You don't allow uncertainty to settle. You stay in a state of waiting. This waiting creates strain. The body feels it as tension. The mind feels it as restlessness. Even moments of calm feel incomplete because they are not the future you are hoping for. Presence is never enough. Hope can also distort perception. You selectively notice signs that things will improve and ignore what is actually happening. You minimize current pain because you believe it will be justified later. This delays acceptance. Acceptance is often misunderstood as giving up. But in Buddhism, acceptance is clarity. It is seeing what is here without adding resistance. Hope that rejects the present blocks this clarity. It replaces observation with expectation. There is also a moral pressure around hope. People are praised for staying hopeful, even when hope is exhausting them. Admitting that you are tired of hoping can feel like failure, so you continue, even when it hurts. This creates isolation. You may feel guilty for feeling worn down. You may hide your fatigue behind positivity. The inner experience becomes disconnected from the outer message. Buddhist wisdom invites a different relationship with hope, not hope as a promise, but hope as openness. Not hope that demands change, but hope that allows possibility without attachment. This reframed hope does not say, things will get better. It says, things will change. It does not insist on improvement. It allows movement. This kind of hope does not fight reality. It rests inside it. When hope stops demanding a specific outcome, something relaxes. You stop bargaining with life. You stop waiting for permission to feel okay. You allow yourself to experience peace even when circumstances are unresolved. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop tying your well-being to guarantees. You still act, you still respond, but you do not require success for inner stability. Holding on to outcome-based hope often keeps pain alive. You revisit the same thoughts, asking when things will shift. You replay scenarios, imagining relief. This repetition reinforces suffering. When hope loosens, attention returns to what is real. You feel sadness without rushing it toward meaning. You feel uncertainty without covering it with optimism. Emotions move more honestly. There is also a subtle aggression in false hope. It pushes against reality. It says, this should not be happening. Even when spoken kindly, the message is rejection. The present moment is treated as an obstacle. This aggression drains energy. You are constantly pushing against what is. This is why hope can feel tiring. It requires effort to maintain belief in a future that has not arrived. Buddhist practice encourages meeting reality without decoration, not pessimistically, but directly. When you see clearly, hope is no longer needed to survive the moment. The moment becomes workable on its own. This clarity allows a different kind of strength to emerge. Not the strength of endurance, but the strength of presence. You are not waiting to live. You are living now, even if it's messy. When hope is released, grief can finally complete itself. As long as you are hoping things will return to how they were, grief remains suspended. Acceptance allows grief to move through and soften. This applies not only to loss, but to unfulfilled expectations, dreams that didn't materialize, versions of life that never came. Hope can keep these ghosts alive. Letting go allows space for what is actually here. Buddhism does not replace hope with despair. It replaces hope with trust. Trust that life does not need to match your plans to be meaningful. Trust that you can meet whatever arises. This trust is quieter than hope. It does not motivate through promises. It stabilizes through presence. It does not lean forward. It stands here. When you stop using hope to escape discomfort, discomfort loses some of its power. It is no longer something to survive until conditions improve. It becomes something you can sit with. This sitting does not mean resignation. It means intimacy with experience. You feel life directly instead of through the filter of expectation. False hope often delays action as well. You wait for things to improve on their own, or you wait until conditions are perfect. Releasing hope can actually increase clarity about what can be done now. Without hope clouding perception, choices become simpler. You respond based on what is present, not what you wish were happening. This leads to wiser action. Hope that is attached to outcome also creates fear of disappointment. You guard yourself emotionally. You don't fully engage because loss would hurt too much. Releasing hope allows fuller participation. This fuller participation does not guarantee happiness. It guarantees honesty. You stop pretending that optimism is enough to carry you through everything. Buddhist teachings emphasize seeing things as they are. When hope no longer interferes with this seeing, suffering decreases. Not because life improves, but because resistance ends. You stop demanding that life reassure you before you relax. You stop postponing peace. You stop negotiating with reality. There is relief in this. Not relief because everything is okay, but relief because you are no longer fighting what is not okay. Hope, when released, transforms into something simpler. A willingness to stay, a willingness to respond, a willingness to be present without guarantees. You are no longer waiting for life to begin. You are no longer enduring the present in exchange for a future promise. You are here with what is, without needing it to become something else. When the need for hopeful reassurance softens, another quiet habit reveals itself. Even without waiting for life to improve, even without leaning on future promises, the heart can still feel tense. Not because of what is happening, but because of how it is seen, or more precisely, because of who sees it. There is a lingering desire to be understood. There is a deep human urge to explain pain, to be seen correctly, to have someone say, "Yes, that makes sense. I get why you feel this way." This desire is not wrong. It grows from connection. But when the need to be understood becomes a requirement for peace, suffering quietly continues. Many people carry their experiences like unfinished sentences. They replay conversations that never happened. They rehearse explanations in their minds. They wait for the moment when someone finally understands their side. Until that moment arrives, something inside remains tight. This tension can last for years. Long after the event has passed, long after choices have been made, the mind keeps returning to the same question. Do they understand why I did this? When the answer feels like no, discomfort lingers. The wish to be understood often hides behind reasonable motives. You want fairness, you want acknowledgement, you want clarity, but beneath these motives is a subtle attachment, the belief that your inner peace depends on someone else's recognition. This belief quietly gives others power over your emotional state. Their agreement becomes soothing, their misunderstanding becomes painful. You begin monitoring reactions, reading between lines, searching for validation even when it is not offered. Buddhism points to this as another form of clinging. Not clinging to outcomes, not clinging to identity, but clinging to perception. You want reality to reflect you accurately. When it doesn't, discomfort arises. The problem is not that people misunderstand you. Misunderstanding is inevitable. Everyone views life through their own experiences, fears, and limitations. The problem is believing that misunderstanding diminishes your truth. When you need others to validate your pain, you keep the pain active. You revisit it each time it is not acknowledged. You reopen it in conversations, explanations, and internal arguments. The pain becomes something to defend. This defense consumes energy. You feel it as frustration, as bitterness, as the urge to correct. Even silence from others can feel like rejection. You interpret it as proof that your experience does not matter. Over time, this need to be understood can shape behavior. You may over-explain. You may justify choices long after they need no justification. You may feel anxious about how your actions are perceived, even when you are at peace with them internally. This creates a split. Outwardly, you move on. Inwardly, you wait. You wait for understanding to arrive so you can finally rest. Letting go of being understood does not mean becoming indifferent. It means recognizing that your experience is valid even when it is unseen. It means allowing your inner truth to stand on its own. This is difficult because the mind equates being understood with being safe. When others see you correctly, you feel less alone. When they don't, the nervous system reacts as if something is wrong. But safety does not actually come from agreement. It comes from self-trust. When you trust your own experience, misunderstanding loses its sting. Buddhist teachings encourage turning attention inward, not to isolate, but to stabilize. When you stop outsourcing validation, you reclaim authority over your inner life. This does not mean you stop communicating. It means you stop communicating to prove something. You speak when it feels true, not when it feels necessary to be accepted. There is relief in this shift. You no longer need to persuade others of your pain. You no longer need to justify your boundaries. You no longer need to convince anyone that your choices were reasonable. The mind initially resists this release. It fears being dismissed. It fears invisibility. It fears being alone with experience. But this fear is based on an old belief that connection requires agreement. In reality, connection deepens when you are no longer defending yourself. Conversations become lighter. You listen more. You speak with less urgency. You allow differences without needing to resolve them. Letting go of being understood also softens resentment. When you stop expecting others to get it, you stop keeping score. You release the silent demand that they catch up to your inner world. This release changes how you relate to the past. Old misunderstandings lose their emotional charge. You stop revisiting moments where you felt unseen. The story loosens because it no longer needs a witness. Your sense of self becomes quieter and more grounded. You no longer define yourself through reaction. You no longer need applause for your survival. Buddhism teaches that suffering increases when we cling to how things should be perceived. The moment you let perception be what it is, suffering decreases. This does not mean people will suddenly understand you more. It means their understanding stops being central. Their opinions no longer determine your peace. There is a subtle dignity in this. You stand without defense. You act without needing explanation. You allow yourself to be misread without correcting every misunderstanding. This dignity does not isolate you. It frees you. You engage with others from choice, not need. You share from openness, not from hunger. Letting go of being understood also allows deeper compassion. When you see how limited perception is, you stop taking misunderstanding personally. You recognize that others are acting from their own stories. This recognition softens judgment. You stop assuming ill intent. You stop expecting perfect empathy. You accept human limitation without bitterness. The nervous system relaxes as well. It no longer scans for approval. It no longer tightens when opinions differ. There is more internal space. You begin to notice how much energy was spent managing impressions, explaining yourself, clarifying, correcting. All of that energy returns when you stop. With this energy comes presence. You become more available to what is happening now rather than what is being thought about you. This does not mean you never feel the wish to be understood again. The wish may arise naturally, but you no longer obey it. You let it pass without building a story. Peace grows in this space, not the peace of being seen, but the peace of being rooted. You trust your own knowing. When you no longer need others to validate your pain, pain completes itself more quickly. It moves through without needing acknowledgement to resolve. You realize that understanding from others is pleasant, but not essential. It is a gift, not a requirement. Life becomes simpler. You speak when you want. You are silent when you want. Neither choice threatens your sense of self. You stop asking the world to mirror you. You stop waiting for recognition. You stop holding your breath for agreement. There is freedom here. Quiet, steady freedom. You are no longer carrying the burden of being seen correctly. You are simply living without explanation. When the urge to be understood finally loosens, something else often remains quietly unresolved. You no longer need others to validate your pain. You no longer feel compelled to explain yourself. Yet inside, there can still be a low ache, not sharp, not loud, but unfinished. It doesn't ask for sympathy. It asks for answers. It asks for closure. There is a particular kind of discomfort that comes from not knowing why someone left, why something ended the way it did, why effort wasn't enough, why silence replaced connection. The mind tells itself that once the explanation arrives, peace will follow. Until then, something stays open. This search feels reasonable. Humans are meaning-making beings. Understanding helps us orient ourselves. It helps us place events into a story that feels coherent. But when closure becomes a demand rather than a natural unfolding, it quietly prolongs suffering. Closure is often imagined as a final conversation, a clear explanation, an apology, or a moment where everything suddenly makes sense. The mind believes that without this moment, healing is incomplete. So it keeps the door open, it keeps revisiting the wound, hoping clarity will arrive. What is rarely questioned is whether clarity is actually needed, or whether the need for clarity is what keeps the wound alive. Many wounds do not stay open because they are deep, but because they are revisited. The mind returns again and again, asking the same questions, replaying the same scenes, searching for a missing piece. This repetition feels productive, but it rarely brings peace. It brings familiarity. The mind tells itself it is seeking understanding, but often it is seeking control. An explanation would make the past predictable. It would restore order. It would turn uncertainty into something solid. This desire mirrors the old habit of control, now focused on the past instead of the future. Buddhist teachings point out that not everything resolves through explanation. Some events do not come with clean narratives. Some endings are incomplete. Some actions make sense only to the person who acted, and even then, not fully. When closure is demanded, the present moment becomes hostage to the past. You delay peace until understanding arrives. You postpone rest until meaning is delivered. Life is lived with an open loop that never quite closes. This open loop creates tension. You feel it as restlessness, as mental fatigue, as the sense that something is unfinished even when your life has moved on. You may function well, but a part of you stays slightly turned backward. The mind often mistakes this tension for wisdom. It says, "I just want to understand." But understanding does not always bring relief. Sometimes it deepens pain. Sometimes it leads to more questions. Sometimes the explanation itself wounds. There is also a hidden hope in the search for closure. Hope that the explanation will soften the past. Hope that it will change how the event feels. Hope that it will validate your experience. When this hope is not fulfilled, disappointment compounds the original hurt. Surrendering the need for closure does not mean abandoning understanding altogether. It means recognizing when the search itself has become the source of suffering. It means seeing that some questions do not have answers that satisfy the heart. Buddhism teaches that clinging to resolution is another form of attachment. You cling to the idea that the past must make sense before you can be free. But freedom does not require agreement from history. It requires presence now. When you stop demanding closure, something shifts. The mind initially resists. It fears that without answers, the pain will never settle. But pain does not settle through explanation alone. It settles through allowing. Allowing does not mean approving. It means letting the past be what it is without trying to reshape it through thought. It means acknowledging that something ended without clarity and choosing not to reopen it every day. This choice is not easy. The mind has been trained to solve, to analyze, to complete loops. Letting a loop remain open feels unnatural, but not every story needs a final chapter to stop hurting. Some wounds close not when they are understood, but when they are no longer touched. The body understands this before the mind does. When you stop replaying the event, the nervous system slowly calms. Emotional charge decreases. The wound stops being activated, not because it was explained, but because it was left alone. Closure through explanation often keeps attention locked on the event. Closure through surrender releases attention back to life. One tightens, the other opens. There is also a humility in surrendering closure. You accept that not everything will make sense from your perspective. You accept the limits of knowledge. This humility softens the ego's need to resolve everything. Many people fear that without closure they will forget what happened or lose their sense of justice. But letting go of closure does not erase memory. It changes relationship. The past remains, but it no longer demands daily engagement. Justice does not always come in the form of explanation. Sometimes it comes as distance, sometimes as growth, sometimes as peace that no longer depends on understanding. When you stop seeking closure from others, you stop waiting for them to complete your healing. You reclaim responsibility for your inner state. This does not mean blaming yourself. It means choosing not to remain stuck. There is also a quiet grief in surrendering closure. You grieve the version of reality where everything made sense. You grieve the hope that answers would arrive and fix the feeling. Allowing this grief is part of release. Buddhism does not rush this process. It invites patience. You notice the urge to explain. You notice the questions arise, and you let them pass without feeding them. This is not suppression. It is non-attachment. Non-attachment means allowing questions to exist without needing them answered. It means letting uncertainty be present without turning it into a problem. Over time, the questions lose intensity. They appear less often. When they do, they no longer pull you in. You see them as mental habits, not urgent needs. This frees enormous energy. Energy that was spent revisiting the past becomes available for the present. You engage more fully with what is here rather than what is unresolved. Life begins to feel less interrupted. You are not constantly pulled back into old moments. You respond to current situations without filtering them through unfinished business. Surrendering closure also changes how you relate to others. You stop waiting for apologies that may never come. You stop needing explanations to move forward. You stop measuring people by whether they gave you what you needed. This does not mean reconciliation always happens. It means your peace is no longer delayed by someone else's actions. The mind may still occasionally ask why, but the question no longer carries emotional urgency. It becomes curiosity rather than demand, and curiosity does not wound. Buddhist wisdom recognizes that life is not a perfectly edited story. It is messy, fragmented, sometimes incomplete. Insisting on neat endings creates suffering because reality does not comply. When you allow incompleteness, something surprising happens. Wholeness appears, not because everything was resolved, but because nothing is being resisted. You stop needing the past to be different. You stop asking it to justify itself. You allow it to exist as part of your experience without letting it define your present. The wound closes quietly when it is no longer reopened. There is no ceremony, no final explanation, just less pull, less charge, less weight. Peace does not come from knowing everything. It comes from knowing when to stop asking. When the demand for closure softens, the mind no longer circles the past, looking for missing answers. There is more space, fewer open wounds being touched. Yet in this space, another pressure often becomes clearer. It does not come from what happened before. It comes from what you believe must happen next. A quiet voice that says you should be better by now. This voice rarely sounds harsh. It often sounds reasonable. It talks about growth, discipline, awareness, healing, progress. It tells you that working on yourself is good, even necessary. And on the surface, that is true. But when improvement becomes an obligation rather than a choice, it stops being care and becomes rejection. The need to always improve creates a subtle tension with the present self. You are here, but you are not quite acceptable yet. You are allowed to exist, but only conditionally, only as a work in progress. Peace is postponed until you become someone slightly different. This pressure is easy to miss because it is praised by culture. Productivity is admired, self-awareness is encouraged, growth is celebrated. But beneath constant self-optimization is often a belief that who you are right now is not enough. This belief does not shout, it whispers. It shows up as restlessness even when things are fine. It shows up as guilt when you relax. It shows up as dissatisfaction that has no clear cause. You may tell yourself you are motivated, but the body feels tired. Buddhism points gently to this pattern. It does not reject growth. It questions the mindset behind it. Are you growing from curiosity and care, or from fear of being insufficient? When self-improvement is driven by fear, the self becomes a problem to solve. Every emotion is evaluated, every habit is scrutinized, every flaw is highlighted. You are always watching yourself from a distance, measuring how far you still have to go. This creates inner division. There is the one who is judging and the one being judged. The judge believes it is helping. The one being judged feels constantly behind. This inner split is a form of suffering. You may notice how difficult it becomes to rest without guilt. Even downtime feels unproductive. The mind whispers that you could be learning something, fixing something, becoming something. Stillness feels undeserved. Over time, this creates chronic dissatisfaction. Achievements lose their sweetness quickly. As soon as one goal is reached, another appears. The finish line keeps moving. Satisfaction becomes temporary, almost suspicious. This is because the underlying belief has not changed. No amount of improvement can satisfy a belief that you are fundamentally not enough. Each improvement simply raises the standard. Buddhist teachings remind us that suffering arises when we cling to an idea of who we should be. The ideal self becomes a reference point that reality never fully matches. The gap between the real and the ideal generates tension. This does not mean you stop learning or changing. It means you stop using change as a requirement for worth. You allow growth to happen without turning it into a verdict on your current value. When improvement is driven by acceptance rather than rejection, it feels lighter. You learn because you are interested, not because you are defective. You change habits because it supports life, not because you are ashamed of who you are. The difference is subtle but powerful. One path tightens, the other opens. Constant self-optimization often comes with comparison. You measure yourself against others, against teachers, against imagined versions of who you could be. Comparison keeps the mind restless. There is always someone ahead, always something missing. This comparison reinforces the belief that peace belongs to a future version of you. The present self becomes a temporary placeholder. You live slightly ahead of yourself, never fully arriving. Buddhism invites a radical shift here. Instead of fixing the self, you observe it. Instead of improving the self, you understand it. Awareness replaces correction. This awareness is not passive, it is deeply attentive. You notice patterns without condemning them. You see habits without turning them into enemies. This allows change to happen naturally, without violence. Self-rejection disguised as improvement often shows up as harsh inner language. Words like should, must, and not enough appear frequently. These words create pressure, not clarity. When you release the self that must always improve, this language softens. You speak to yourself with more neutrality. You describe rather than judge. This changes the nervous system's response. The body relaxes when it is no longer being pushed. Learning becomes easier. Insight deepens. Growth happens with less resistance. There is also a grief in releasing constant self-improvement. You grieve the belief that perfection would finally make you safe. You grieve the promise that becoming better would end discomfort. Allowing this grief is important. Without it, the mind keeps chasing improvement as a substitute for acceptance. Buddhism teaches that the self is not a project. It is a process. Trying to perfect a process creates frustration. Watching it unfold creates wisdom. When you stop demanding improvement, you begin to meet yourself where you are, not as a failure, not as a success, just as a human experience unfolding. This meeting brings unexpected relief. You no longer have to earn your right to exist. You no longer have to justify rest. You no longer have to prove growth. Growth still happens, but it is no longer forced. It arises from understanding rather than pressure. Habits change because awareness deepens, not because you punish yourself. The mind becomes quieter when it stops managing itself. There is less internal commentary, less evaluation, more presence. Releasing the self that must always improve does not make you stagnant. It makes you honest. You see what is actually happening instead of what should be happening. From this honesty, real change emerges. Not dramatic, not constant, but sustainable. You begin to trust that you are allowed to be here as you are, even while changing. Peace no longer waits at the end of improvement. It exists alongside imperfection. Nothing needs to be fixed for this to be true. When the pressure to constantly improve fades, a softer space opens inside. You are no longer fighting yourself. You are no longer trying to become worthy of peace. Yet even in this gentler state, life brings moments that shake the heart deeply, not through inner judgment, but through loss. Something you loved is taken away. Something meaningful disappears. And no amount of awareness or acceptance seems to protect you from the ache. Loss has a way of cutting through every philosophy. It does not ask whether you are ready. It does not care how much work you have done on yourself. It arrives quietly or suddenly and rearranges everything. The mind's first response is often confusion, then pain, then a question that echoes without rest. Why? There is a common belief that loss is a form of punishment, that something was done wrong, that a lesson is being forced upon you. This belief may not be spoken aloud, but it lives beneath the surface. It turns grief into self-blame and sorrow into shame. Buddhist wisdom does not frame loss as punishment. It does not say life takes things away to hurt you. It points instead to impermanence and redirection, not as consolation, but as truth. Everything that comes into being also passes. This is not cruelty. It is the nature of life. When something you love is removed, the pain does not come only from absence. It comes from the belief that what was taken was meant to stay, that it was supposed to complete you, that without it, something essential is missing. Attachment deepens love, but it also sharpens loss. You do not suffer because you cared. You suffer because the mind believed what you cared about was permanent. When that belief collapses, the nervous system reacts with shock. Trusting life during loss does not mean denying grief. Grief is a natural response to separation. Buddhism does not ask you to bypass it. It asks you not to add layers of meaning that increase suffering. One of those layers is the idea that loss means failure, that if you were wiser, more spiritual, more careful, things would not have ended. This belief gives the illusion of control, but it also creates guilt. You punish yourself for something that was never fully in your hands. Another layer is the belief that what was lost cannot be replaced, that joy has a limited supply, that love comes only once. This belief freezes the heart. It turns grief into fear of the future. Buddhist insight offers a different view. It sees loss as movement, not as judgment. What leaves makes space, not always immediately, not always gently, but inevitably. Space is created whether you welcome it or not. This does not mean everything that comes next will be better. It means life continues to unfold. Clinging to what was blocks your ability to meet what is now possible. When something you love is taken, attention collapses inward. You replay memories. You revisit moments. You try to hold on to what cannot be held. This is a natural response. But when replay becomes residence, pain deepens. Trusting life in loss means allowing grief without turning it into identity. You feel sorrow, but you do not become sorrow. You feel emptiness, but you do not become empty. The body needs time to process loss. Emotions come in waves. Some days feel bearable, others feel heavy. Buddhism teaches patience here, not patience as endurance, but patience as non-interference. You allow the waves to rise and fall without forcing resolution. Loss often strips away illusions, illusions of control, illusions of permanence, illusions of fairness. This stripping feels brutal because it exposes vulnerability. But vulnerability is not weakness. It is reality without armor. When you trust life, you stop asking loss to explain itself. You stop demanding meaning before allowing yourself to breathe. You accept that some things end without justification. This acceptance does not erase love. Love does not disappear when its object does. It changes form. It becomes memory. It becomes gratitude. It becomes quiet presence. Buddhist teachings remind us that clinging turns love into suffering. When you demand that love remain unchanged, pain intensifies. When you allow love to transform, pain softens. Loss also reveals where identity was attached. When something you love leaves, you may feel like a part of you has gone with it. This feeling shows how deeply the self was intertwined with the object of love. Trusting life here means allowing identity to loosen. You are more than what you lost. This is not a dismissal of pain, it is an expansion of perspective. Grief often brings fear that joy will never return, that life has peaked, that everything meaningful is behind you. These thoughts feel convincing because loss narrows vision. Buddhism encourages widening awareness during grief. You notice not only what is gone, but what remains. Breath, body, small moments. Simple connections. This does not replace what was lost. It reminds you that life still moves. Redirection does not mean loss was necessary. It means that after loss, life takes a different shape. Paths close, others open. You do not need to celebrate this. You only need to acknowledge it. Many people resist redirection because it feels like betrayal. Moving forward can feel like abandoning what was loved, but staying frozen does not honor loss. It only prolongs suffering. Trusting life allows you to carry what mattered without being trapped by it. You remember without reliving. You honor without clinging. Buddhist wisdom also teaches that loss is shared. No one escapes it. Knowing this does not remove pain, but it removes isolation. You are not uniquely punished. You are participating in a universal human experience. This recognition can soften bitterness. You stop asking why this happened to you specifically. You see that life unfolds unevenly for everyone. Loss also teaches humility. You realize how little control you had over what you assumed was secure. This humility can open compassion both for yourself and others. Trusting life does not mean trusting that things will work out the way you want. It means trusting that you can meet what arises, even when it hurts. When you stop interpreting loss as punishment, anger softens. You stop fighting reality. You stop turning pain into a verdict on your worth. The heart gradually adjusts, not by forgetting, but by expanding. You make room for grief alongside living. You stop waiting for grief to end before participating in life. This participation is gentle at first, small steps, small engagements. Buddhism does not rush this. It respects the pace of the heart. Loss often deepens awareness. You notice fragility. You notice preciousness. Moments feel more vivid because you know they pass. Trusting life means allowing this awareness without turning it into fear. You appreciate without gripping. You love without demanding permanence. There is a quiet strength that grows through loss when it is not resisted. You learn that you can survive change, that you can feel deeply and continue. This strength is not hard, it is flexible. It bends rather than breaks. Loss also dissolves illusions about happiness. You see that happiness was never about securing everything you love forever. It was about presence within impermanence. Buddhist insight does not promise protection from loss. It offers freedom within it. Freedom from self-blame. Freedom from resentment. Freedom from the belief that life is against you. Trusting life when it removes what you love means staying open when everything in you wants to close. It means allowing grief to pass through without building walls around the heart. This openness does not make loss painless, it makes it honest. Over time, something settles, not because you understand why loss happened, but because you stop arguing with the fact that it did. You stop asking life to justify itself. You begin to live again, not in the same way, not with the same assumptions, but with deeper presence. What was lost remains part of your story, but it no longer blocks the next page. You carry love forward without needing it to look the same. Trust in life grows quietly here, not as belief, but as experience. You have seen that even when something precious is taken, you remain. Breath continues. Awareness continues. Life continues. This trust does not eliminate sorrow. It allows sorrow to coexist with living. You do not rush grief away. You do not worship it either. Loss becomes a passage, not a punishment. A movement, not a verdict. Life turns, and you turn with it, without needing to know where it leads. When life takes something you loved and you learn to keep your heart open, another kind of loss quietly makes itself known. Nothing has been taken yet. No event has occurred. And still, there is grief. It arrives without warning, heavy and confusing, because what hurts is not what happened, but what was supposed to happen. There is a future many people carry inside without realizing it. A future that feels solid, reasonable, almost guaranteed. It is built slowly, through expectations, plans, and quiet assumptions. You don't just think about it, you live from it. You organize your choices around it. You comfort yourself with it when things are hard. This future feels so real that when it begins to slip, the body reacts as if something has already been lost. Attachment to an imagined future is subtle because it often looks like hope, motivation, or direction. You tell yourself you're being practical, you're planning, you're setting goals. But beneath this planning is an emotional investment. You don't just want that future to happen, you need it to happen for your life to make sense. This is where grief begins before loss. You might notice it as sadness without a clear cause, or anxiety that doesn't match your present circumstances, or a sense of disappointment even though nothing bad has occurred yet. The mind is already mourning a future that is no longer certain. Buddhist wisdom points gently to this habit. Suffering does not only come from what is taken away, it comes from clinging to what has not arrived. When you attach to a future, you turn possibility into expectation, and expectation, when unmet, becomes pain. The imagined future often feels safer than the present. It promises resolution. It promises stability. It promises a version of you who is settled, confident, complete. When the present feels uncertain, the future becomes a refuge. But refuges built on imagination are fragile. The moment reality stops aligning with the plan, fear appears. The mind scrambles to protect the image. It tries to adjust timelines, reinterpret signs, or deny what is changing. This resistance creates tension. You live half in the present and half in a future that may never arrive. You are not fully here, and you are not fully there. This split drains energy. Attachment to the future also creates pressure. You feel rushed. You feel behind. You measure your current life against a version that exists only in your mind. No matter how much you do, it feels insufficient because you are not where you thought you'd be. This pressure is often internal. Others may not see it. From the outside, you appear functional, even successful. Inside, there is a quiet grief for a life that was supposed to unfold differently. The mind may replay turning points, decisions that seemed small at the time, moments where you believe things went off track. You ask yourself how things would look now if those moments had gone another way. This replay strengthens the attachment. It keeps the imagined future alive. Buddhism teaches that the future is not something you possess. It is not an object you can secure. It is a concept formed in the mind, shaped by desire and fear. When you cling to it, you suffer not because it disappears, but because it was never solid to begin with. Letting go of the future you were certain about does not mean becoming directionless. It means releasing the belief that your worth, happiness, or meaning depends on a specific outcome. This is difficult because imagined futures often carry identity. You don't just want a certain life. You want to be a certain person within that life. When the future dissolves, identity shakes. You may ask yourself who you are without that plan, without that role, without that timeline. This uncertainty can feel unsettling, even frightening, but it also creates openness. Grief for an imagined future is real grief. The body experiences it as loss. It deserves acknowledgement, but it does not need to be fed with stories about failure or wasted time. Many people rush to replace one imagined future with another. They quickly form a new plan to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty, but this only repeats the pattern. The attachment shifts, but the suffering remains. Buddhism encourages staying with the discomfort instead, not to suffer more, but to see clearly. You notice how the mind creates futures to feel safe. You see how easily possibility turns into obligation. This seeing loosens the grip. You begin to hold plans more lightly. You still move forward, but without demanding certainty. You allow life to surprise you without interpreting surprise as betrayal. Letting go of the future you were certain about also changes how you experience time. You stop rushing the present to get somewhere else. You stop postponing peace until conditions are met. You may notice how often you told yourself, "I'll be okay when this ends, when that begins, when I arrive there." Each sentence delayed your life. Releasing attachment to the future brings life back to now. Not as a consolation prize, but as the only place experience actually happens. This does not mean the present suddenly becomes perfect. It means you stop rejecting it in favor of an idea. You allow moments to be incomplete without labeling them as wrong. There is also a quiet freedom in not knowing. When you stop pretending the future is settled, curiosity replaces fear. You become more responsive, more flexible, less rigid in your expectations. Buddhist teachings emphasize impermanence not to remove hope, but to remove false certainty. When you accept that the future is fluid, you stop grieving its changes in advance. This acceptance reduces anxiety. You are no longer constantly checking whether life is staying on track. You stop interpreting every shift as a warning sign. Letting go of imagined futures also softens regret. You stop seeing the past as a series of missed chances leading away from the life you were supposed to have. You see it as the only path that could have been walked. This perspective brings compassion. You recognize that past decisions were made with the awareness available at the time. You stop punishing yourself for not predicting the future. The mind may still form images of what could be. That is natural. The difference is you no longer attach your sense of self to those images. They become possibilities, not promises. Grief still arises when plans fall apart, but it moves through more cleanly. It is not compounded by the belief that something essential has been stolen from you. You begin to trust that meaning does not come from fulfilling a script. It comes from presence within change. Life does not need to match your expectations to be meaningful. This trust does not make you passive, it makes you adaptable. You act with intention, but you allow outcomes to shift. You stop clinging to certainty as a form of safety. Letting go of the future you were certain about also changes how you relate to others. You stop measuring relationships by whether they fit into your plan. You allow connections to exist without assigning them a permanent role. This reduces fear of endings. You appreciate what is real now without demanding it lead somewhere specific. Buddhism teaches that clinging to the future creates suffering because it pulls you away from the present. When attention is constantly ahead, life is always being missed. Releasing that pull allows attention to settle. You notice details again, sensations, conversations, small moments that were overshadowed by anticipation. You stop living in preparation mode. You stop waiting for your real life to start. You recognize that it has been happening all along. The future you were certain about may never arrive, or it may arrive in a form you never expected. Either way, Attachment only creates pain in advance. Letting go does not erase dreams. It frees them from obligation. They become expressions of interest rather than conditions for happiness. You are no longer grieving a future that hasn't happened yet. You are living the life that is unfolding now. There is relief in this. Quiet relief, the kind that comes when you stop arguing with time. You allow life to move without needing to know where it leads. You trust that you can meet what comes, even if it looks nothing like what you planned. The imagined future loosens its hold, the present opens, and in that opening grief softens into curiosity, and pressure gives way to breath. When the grip on a certain future loosens, there is more room to breathe. You are no longer forcing life to follow a script. You are no longer measuring today against an imagined tomorrow. Yet even in this openness, another attachment can quietly take shape. It does not look like fear or desire. It looks like clarity, like awareness, like being right. There is comfort in believing you see more clearly than others, that you understand life better, that your values are more refined, your choices more conscious, your reactions more justified. This comfort feels earned. After all, you have reflected. You have questioned yourself. You have let go of many illusions. Surely that counts for something. But when being right becomes part of who you are, it hardens. It stops being insight and starts being identity. Moral superiority rarely announces itself loudly. It often speaks softly through thoughts like, "I would never do that," or "they just don't get it," or "I've outgrown this kind of thinking." These thoughts feel harmless, even reasonable, but they create separation. Buddhism points to this separation as another subtle source of suffering. When you cling to being good or aware, you create distance between yourself and others. You divide the world into those who see and those who don't, those who are conscious and those who are still asleep. This division blocks compassion, even when your intentions are kind. The problem is not discernment. Discernment is necessary. The problem is attachment to identity built on discernment. When awareness becomes a badge, it stops being fluid. It becomes something to protect. You may notice how easily judgment appears when someone acts differently than you would. You may not say anything out loud, but inside there is a tightening, a quiet evaluation, a sense of being above the situation. This tightening does not feel like anger. It feels like certainty. And certainty is difficult to question because it feels stable. But certainty about being right often hides fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of being ordinary, fear of losing the ground you have built under your sense of self. Buddhist teachings emphasize humility for this reason, not as self-denial, but as realism. No one sees the whole picture. No one is free from conditioning. Awareness is always partial. When you cling to moral superiority, you stop listening. You hear others through the filter of correction rather than curiosity. You look for where they are mistaken instead of where they are human. This blocks compassion because compassion requires closeness. It requires meeting others without needing them to be different. Superiority creates distance. It keeps you safe, but isolated. You may notice this most clearly in moments of disagreement. When someone holds a view you find harmful or misguided, the impulse to correct or dismiss can arise quickly. You may tell yourself you are standing for truth, but beneath that stance is often resistance to discomfort. Discomfort arises when reality does not align with your values. Moral superiority becomes a way to push that discomfort away. You reassure yourself that you are on the right side. This reassurance feels calming, but it prevents deeper understanding. Buddhism does not deny the existence of harmful actions or wrong views. It questions the inner stance from which you respond to them. Are you responding from clarity or from the need to feel superior? When superiority is present, compassion weakens. You may still act ethically, but your heart is less open. You see behavior, not suffering. You see mistakes, not fear. Non-attachment to moral superiority means allowing awareness to remain flexible. You recognize harmful actions without turning them into proof of your own goodness. You hold values without turning them into identity. This flexibility allows compassion to move. You can acknowledge wrongdoing without dehumanizing. You can disagree without disconnecting. Moral superiority also shows up in subtle self-comparison. You compare your progress, your insight, your emotional regulation to others. Even within spiritual or reflective communities, this comparison thrives. Who is more awake? Who has let go more fully? Who reacts less? This comparison creates pressure. It keeps you watching yourself. It keeps you invested in maintaining an image of awareness. When you fall short, shame appears. When you succeed, pride appears. Both tighten the self. Buddhism teaches that pride and shame are two sides of the same attachment. Both arise from identification with a fixed self. When you let go of that identification, both soften. Non-attachment to being right also changes how you relate to mistakes. You no longer need to defend yourself. You can admit when you are wrong without feeling diminished. This openness deepens trust, both with yourself and others. When you stop needing to be right, conversations change. You listen more fully. You ask questions without an agenda. You allow yourself to be influenced. This does not weaken you. It strengthens understanding. Compassion grows naturally in this space, not as an effort, but as a response. You see how beliefs are shaped by experience. You see how fear drives behavior. You see yourself in others, even when you disagree. This recognition does not excuse harm. It contextualizes it. You respond with firmness when needed, but without contempt. Boundaries remain, but they are not weaponized. Moral superiority often narrows empathy. You feel compassion for those you relate to, but not for those you judge. Non-attachment widens empathy. You allow compassion to include those who trigger you. This is difficult work. It challenges the ego directly. The ego wants to be special, advanced, correct. Letting go of that need feels like loss. But what is lost is rigidity, not wisdom. Buddhist practice encourages seeing views as tools, not truths to cling to. When views are held lightly, they can be adjusted. When held tightly, they become obstacles. You may notice moments when you catch yourself feeling above a situation. That noticing is already awareness. The practice is not to judge the judgment, but to release the need it serves. Often the need is safety. Being right feels safe. It gives you ground, but true safety comes from openness, not from certainty. Non-attachment to moral superiority allows you to stay present in complexity. You do not rush to conclusions. You allow situations to be layered. This patience deepens insight. This approach also reduces inner conflict. You stop arguing with yourself about whether you are good enough or aware enough. You allow yourself to be a work in progress without grading it. The heart softens when it no longer needs to defend its position. You feel more connected, less separate, less invested in winning. Buddhism reminds us that clinging to goodness can be as limiting as clinging to badness. Both fix the self. Both create tension. When you release the need to be right, humility appears naturally. Not as self-deprecation, but as openness to learning. You recognize that wisdom is not owned, it moves through. This humility invites compassion. You meet others where they are, not where you think they should be. You respond to suffering rather than judging it. Life becomes less about proving and more about participating. You engage without armor. You allow yourself to be changed by what you encounter. This does not make you passive, it makes you responsive. You act from care, not from superiority. Non-attachment to moral identity also frees you from disappointment when others fail to live up to your standards. You stop expecting perfection. You stop taking mistakes personally. This frees energy that was spent judging returns as presence. You are more available, more attentive, more alive. Compassion deepens not because you try harder, but because there is less distance. You no longer stand above, you stand with. Being right becomes less important than being real. Being good becomes less important than being kind. Being aware becomes less important than being open. You do not lose your values in this process. You lose the need to use them as a shield. There is quiet relief in this. You no longer have to maintain an image. You no longer have to monitor your position. You are free to respond honestly. The heart rests more easily when it is not defending its virtue. You allow yourself to be human, and you allow others the same. This is where compassion flows without effort, not from obligation, but from recognition. You see yourself in the mess of others, and others in your own. Nothing needs to be proven here. There is nothing to win. There is only life unfolding, imperfect and shared. Letting go of moral superiority does not lower you, it brings you closer. When the need to be right loosens, the heart becomes less guarded. You stop standing above others. You stop defending your position. Yet as judgment softens, another force becomes more visible. It does not announce itself as fear. It presents itself as love, as care, as attachment, and only when you look closely do you notice the tension underneath. There is a common belief that attachment exists because we love deeply, that we cling because we care, that holding on is proof of connection. But Buddhism looks beneath the surface and sees something more fragile at work. Often, attachment is not born from love itself, but from fear, not fear of losing the other, but fear of what remains when the other is gone. Emotional attachment feels warm at first. It brings comfort, familiarity, and a sense of belonging, but it also carries anxiety, a subtle alertness, a need to secure, protect, and maintain. When attachment is present, love stops being free. It becomes conditional, even if the condition is never spoken. You may notice this fear in small ways. The discomfort when someone pulls away slightly. The anxiety when a message is not answered. The urge to hold tighter when things feel uncertain. These reactions are not about love disappearing. They are about fear being activated. Buddhism teaches that attachment is not the same as love. Love is spacious. Attachment is narrow. Love allows movement. Attachment resists it. Love wishes well without demand. Attachment demands reassurance. The fear behind attachment often goes unnoticed because it feels personal. It says, I need this connection. But what it really says is, I'm afraid of what I'll feel without it. This fear is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a quiet emptiness the mind is desperate to avoid. Emptiness is deeply misunderstood. It is often associated with loneliness, meaninglessness, or lack. So the mind learns to fill it. With people, with roles, with emotional bonds that promise stability. Attachment becomes a strategy to avoid facing this emptiness. From a Buddhist perspective, emptiness does not mean nothingness. It means openness. It means the absence of a fixed self that needs constant reinforcement. But when this is not understood, emptiness feels threatening. Attachment steps in to provide structure. This is why attachment often intensifies when identity feels unstable. When you are unsure who you are, you cling more tightly to who you are with. When inner ground feels shaky, external connection becomes a lifeline. The problem is not connection. Humans are relational beings. The problem is using connection to avoid inner space. When attachment is driven by fear, it suffocates both you and the other. You may notice how attachment demands predictability. You want reassurance. You want consistency. You want guarantees. When these are threatened, anxiety rises. Love becomes vigilant. This vigilance creates suffering. You monitor the relationship. You interpret signals. You brace for loss even while things are fine. The present moment is never fully enjoyed because part of you is already preparing for absence. Buddhism points out that attachment creates pain not only when something ends, but while it exists, you suffer in advance. You fear loss while holding what you love. This fear colors the entire experience. Understanding the fear behind attachment changes how you relate to it. You stop judging yourself for clinging. You see that clinging is an attempt to feel safe. This recognition brings compassion rather than shame. Fear of emptiness also shows up as fear of being alone, not physically alone, but internally alone. Alone with your thoughts, alone with your feelings, alone without a mirror. Attachment offers a mirror. It reflects you back to yourself. When that mirror feels essential, losing it feels like losing yourself. This is why attachment can feel like survival. Buddhist teachings encourage gently turning toward this fear rather than running from it. You notice the urge to cling. You ask what it is protecting you from. Often the answer is not loss, but space. Space feels dangerous to a mind trained to define itself through objects and relationships. Without something to hold on to, the self feels uncertain. But this uncertainty is not harm. It is freedom misunderstood. When you allow emptiness without filling it, you begin to see its nature. It is not cold. It is not lacking. It is open, alive, and responsive. From this openness, love arises without fear. Attachment tries to fix love into a form. Emptiness allows love to move. When you are not afraid of inner space, you do not need to trap connection. This does not mean you stop caring deeply. It means you stop needing care to stabilize you. You allow relationships to be expressions of connection rather than sources of identity. Fear-driven attachment also creates roles. You become needed, or you need the other to need you. These roles feel comforting, but they restrict authenticity. You relate through function rather than presence. Buddhism invites releasing these roles. You meet others as they are, not as anchors. You allow connection without obligation. This creates honesty and ease. You may notice resistance here. The mind fears that without attachment, love will fade. But love does not require clinging to exist. In fact, clinging often blocks love's natural flow. When attachment loosens, love becomes lighter. You enjoy without gripping. You care without controlling. You allow closeness without demanding permanence. The fear of emptiness also shows up when relationships change, when intensity fades, when dynamics shift. Attachment interprets change as loss. Love understands change as movement. By seeing the fear beneath attachment, you stop blaming others for your anxiety. You recognize that the discomfort is internal. This recognition restores agency. You no longer ask others to manage your fear. You meet it yourself. You sit with the unease without rushing to fix it. This sitting builds inner stability. Inner stability does not mean independence from connection. It means freedom within connection. You are with others because you choose to be, not because you are afraid not to be. Buddhist practice often involves observing sensations and emotions as they arise. When attachment triggers fear, you notice the tightening, the urge, the story, and you let them pass. Over time, the fear loses intensity. You realize that emptiness does not swallow you, it holds you. You remain intact without constant reinforcement. This understanding changes how you grieve as well. Loss still hurts, but it does not collapse your sense of self. You feel sadness without feeling erased. Fear of emptiness also drives attachment to emotions themselves. You cling to feeling loved. You cling to being important. You cling to emotional highs. When they fade, you panic. Letting emotions come and go without attaching identity to them creates resilience. You enjoy warmth without needing it to last. You accept coolness without despair. Buddhism teaches that all experiences are impermanent. Attachment resists this truth. Fear amplifies it. Love accepts it. When you no longer fear emptiness, you stop demanding permanence. You meet each moment fully and release it naturally. This release does not make you distant, it makes you present. You are no longer distracted by fear of losing what is here. Attachment rooted in fear also limits compassion. You prioritize what feels safe over what is true. You avoid honesty to preserve connection. Letting go of fear allows integrity. You speak more openly. You listen more fully. You allow relationships to evolve without manipulation. This does not guarantee comfort. It guarantees authenticity. Fear of emptiness keeps the heart busy. Love rooted in openness lets the heart rest. When you see attachment clearly, you stop romanticizing it. You respect it as a coping mechanism, but you do not mistake it for love. Love does not need to bind. It flows freely when there is nothing to protect against. As fear loosens, attachment softens naturally. You do not force detachment. You simply no longer need to cling. Emptiness reveals itself not as absence, but as space where everything arises and passes. In this space, love is not threatened by change. You remain connected without being trapped. You care without fear. You allow life to move through relationships without gripping. The heart learns that it can stay open even when nothing is held. And in that openness, love becomes what it was always meant to be. As the fear beneath attachment becomes clearer, another layer of pain often reveals itself. You may no longer cling as tightly. You may understand where fear comes from. And yet, something still feels heavy. Not because you are attached to someone, but because you are attached to what was done to you. The story has shifted, but the weight remains. This is where the self who was wronged quietly continues to suffer. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from injustice. It feels sharp, personal, and deeply unfair. Something happened that should not have happened. Someone crossed a line. Something was taken, dismissed, or ignored. At the moment it occurred, the pain was real and unavoidable. But long after the event ends, the suffering can continue through identity. At first, identifying as the one who was wronged feels natural. It validates the pain. It confirms that what happened mattered. It protects against denial. Without this recognition, the experience might feel erased. So the mind holds onto it, not out of bitterness, but out of a need for truth. Over time, however, this identity can solidify. You no longer just remember the injustice, you carry it. It becomes part of how you see yourself and the world. Conversations are filtered through it. Reactions are shaped by it. The nervous system stays alert, as if the threat is still present. Buddhist wisdom does not deny injustice. It does not ask you to pretend harm did not occur. What it questions is what happens when the identity built around injustice becomes permanent. When the event ends, but the self who was wronged continues to live. This identity often feels justified, and in many ways it is. Something unfair happened. Anger, sadness, and resentment are natural responses. The problem arises when these responses harden into a fixed sense of self. When you stop saying, "This happened to me," and start living as, "This is who I am now." The body does not know time the way the mind does. When the story of injustice is replayed, the body reacts as if it is happening again. Heart rate changes, muscles tighten, emotions rise. This is how suffering continues even in the absence of danger. Holding on to the identity of being wronged can feel like holding on to dignity. Letting go may feel like letting the other person off the hook. It may feel like betrayal of your own pain. This fear keeps the identity alive, but Buddhism makes a clear distinction between accountability and attachment. You can acknowledge wrongdoing without building your sense of self around it. You can remember without reliving. You can honor pain without carrying it forever. The self who was wronged often seeks balance. It wants acknowledgement. It wants fairness restored. When this does not happen, frustration deepens. You may replay conversations that never occurred. You may imagine different outcomes. You may wait for recognition that never comes. This waiting keeps the wound open. Peace becomes conditional. It depends on something external happening to correct the past. When correction does not arrive, suffering persists. The identity rooted in injustice also shapes expectations. You may approach new situations defensively. You may anticipate harm. You may interpret neutral actions as threats. The past becomes a lens through which everything is viewed. This lens narrows experience. You stop meeting situations fresh. You respond to what was, not what is. The present moment becomes crowded with old meaning. Buddhist teachings point out that clinging to identity is a primary source of suffering. Any identity, even one based on truth, becomes limiting when held tightly. The self who was wronged needs to be defended. Defended selves are never at rest. Anger often accompanies this identity. Anger can be protective, it can signal boundaries. But when it is fed by identity, it turns into resentment. Resentment does not burn hot. It burns slow. It consumes energy quietly. Resentment keeps attention fixed on the past. It keeps the nervous system activated. It convinces you that letting go would mean losing power. But holding on drains power far more than release ever could. Letting go of the self who was wronged does not mean forgetting what happened. It means loosening the grip of identity. It means allowing the experience to be part of your history, not the center of your being. This process is gradual. The mind resists it because the identity has served a purpose. It has protected you from minimizing your pain. It has helped you survive. Respecting that purpose is important. Release cannot be forced. Buddhism encourages awareness instead of suppression. You notice when the story arises. You notice when you are speaking from the place of injury rather than presence. This noticing creates space. In that space, you begin to separate the event from the self. You see that what happened was real, but it is not happening now. The body slowly learns this distinction. Tension decreases, reactivity softens. The self who was wronged often carries a deep sense of isolation. It believes that no one truly understands what happened. This belief reinforces separation. It keeps you alone with the story. Letting go does not require others to understand. It requires you to stop using misunderstanding as a reason to keep suffering active. You do not need consensus to be free. There is also a subtle moral attachment here. Being wronged can feel like moral clarity. You know who was right and who was wrong. This clarity can be grounding, but it can also become rigid. Life is more complex than verdicts. Buddhist insight invites you to see harm without turning it into identity. You recognize suffering without anchoring yourself to it. This allows compassion to arise, even toward yourself. Compassion does not mean excusing harm. It means understanding how suffering perpetuates itself. When you see how your own pain continues through identity, you become less likely to pass it on. The self who was wronged often seeks justice through internal replay. But replay does not restore balance. It reinforces injury. Justice in the inner sense comes from release, not repetition. Releasing this identity also changes how you relate to power. You stop giving the past control over your present. You stop allowing someone else's actions to define your emotional life indefinitely. This does not happen through denial. It happens through acknowledgement, followed by letting be. You say yes to what happened and no to living inside it. Buddhism teaches that suffering persists when the mind resists reality. The reality here is that the event is over. The pain was real, but it does not need to be relived. When you stop identifying as the one who was wronged, you regain flexibility. You respond to situations as they are. You are not constantly protecting a wound. This flexibility brings relief. You may still feel sadness when remembering. You may still feel anger at times, but these feelings move through. They do not define you. The self who was wronged often believes that letting go means losing truth. In reality, truth does not need to be carried like a burden. It can be held lightly. As identity loosens, energy returns. Energy that was spent defending the past becomes available for the present. You engage more fully. You are less guarded. This shift does not erase boundaries. You still know what is acceptable. You still protect yourself. But you do so without carrying the weight of old injury. The body begins to trust again, not blindly, but realistically. You recognize danger when it is present, not when it is remembered. Letting go of the self who was wronged also opens the door to forgiveness, but not as a requirement. Forgiveness may or may not happen. The release is not dependent on it. The release is about freeing yourself from the role that keeps pain alive. It is about choosing not to let the past dictate your inner state. Buddhist teachings emphasize that liberation comes from seeing clearly. When you see how identity rooted in injustice sustains suffering, the grip naturally loosens. You stop asking the past to change. You stop asking others to repair what cannot be repaired. You allow yourself to live without carrying a verdict. This does not minimize what happened. It honors it by refusing to let it consume the rest of your life. The self who was wronged can rest. The event remains part of your story, but it no longer tells it. You stand here now not defined by what was done to you, but open to what is unfolding. Nothing needs to be proven. Nothing needs to be defended. The weight slowly lifts, not because the past was fixed, but because you stopped living inside it. When the identity of being wronged starts to loosen, there is often a rush of relief, less tension, less replay, less need to carry the past like a badge or a burden. In that relief, something else can happen that looks peaceful on the surface, but quietly disconnects you from what is real. It's subtle, it's common, and it can keep pain alive in a different form. This is where spirituality can become a hiding place instead of a path. There is a version of surrender that is true. It is honest, grounded, and awake, and there is a version that is only a mask. It uses spiritual language to avoid feeling what hurts. It looks calm, but it's numb. It sounds wise, but it's disconnected. Buddhism calls us toward truth, not comfort. So the difference matters. Spiritual bypassing happens when you use spiritual ideas to escape emotional reality. You say, everything happens for a reason, while your chest is tight with grief. You say, I'm detached, while your body is shaking with fear. You say, I've forgiven, while resentment is still living in your nervous system. The mind takes spiritual words and uses them as cover. This is not done out of bad intention. It is usually done out of pain, real pain, pain that feels too heavy to hold. The mind reaches for something that sounds higher, cleaner, more controlled. It wants to rise above the mess. But rising above is not the same as being free. True surrender does not float above life. It stands inside life. It feels what is here without needing it to be different. It does not rush emotions away. It does not try to be spiritual instead of human. It allows the full experience of being alive, including the parts that are uncomfortable. Avoidance feels attractive because it gives quick relief. If you label pain as ego, you don't have to feel it. If you call grief attachment, you can shame yourself out of mourning. If you call anger low vibration, you can bury it. But buried emotions do not disappear. They wait, and they return, often through anxiety, tension, fatigue, or sudden emotional storms. Buddhism does not teach you to shame emotions. It teaches you to observe them. Emotions are not moral failures. They are signals moving through the body. When you avoid them using spirituality, you cut yourself off from your own truth. Spiritual bypassing often creates a false self, a self that is always calm, always positive, always understanding, always above conflict. This self feels pure, but it is fragile. It requires constant maintenance. You have to keep pushing down the parts of you that don't match the image. This creates inner conflict. The surface may look peaceful, but underneath there is tension. You may feel guilty for having strong emotions. You may judge yourself for being hurt. You may believe you are failing spiritually because you're still human. True surrender removes this guilt. It says, pain is allowed, confusion is allowed, anger is allowed, grief is allowed. None of these emotions disqualify you from wisdom. In fact, wisdom grows through meeting them honestly. A major difference between surrender and bypassing is presence. Bypassing pulls you away from the body. It turns your attention into ideas. It lives in the head. True surrender brings you into direct experience. You feel sensations. You notice breath. You allow emotion to be felt without turning it into a concept. When you trust life without bypassing, you do not use spirituality as a way to become untouchable. You use it as a way to become intimate with reality. You stop trying to protect yourself from pain with beliefs. You face pain with awareness. There is also a difference in how you speak to yourself. Bypassing language often sounds like correction. I shouldn't feel this. I need to let go. I should be grateful. I should be above this. These statements sound spiritual, but they are often harsh. They are another form of self-rejection. True surrender sounds softer. This hurts. This is here. I can feel this. I don't need to rush. It does not try to fix the feeling. It allows it to move naturally. Bypassing often uses premature forgiveness. You forgive quickly to avoid discomfort. You tell yourself you're done with it, but your body tells another story. You may smile, but your stomach tightens. You may speak kindly, but your tone carries coldness. The unresolved pain leaks out. True surrender does not rush forgiveness. It respects timing. It allows anger to be seen, grief to be felt, boundaries to be clarified. Forgiveness, if it comes from completion, not from pressure. Another sign of bypassing is spiritual superiority. You may see yourself as more evolved because you don't get bothered. You may look down on others who are emotional. This is not peace. This is disconnection turned into identity. True surrender does not create hierarchy. It creates humility. You recognize that everyone suffers. You recognize that emotions are universal. You stop using spirituality to separate yourself from others. Bypassing can also create avoidance of practical action. You may say, I'm trusting the universe, when what you're really doing is avoiding a difficult decision. You may call it surrender, but it is passivity. Buddhism does not teach passivity. It teaches wise action without attachment. True surrender is compatible with action. You can accept reality and still act to reduce harm. You can surrender to what is and still set boundaries. You can trust life and still make choices. A useful way to see the difference is to notice whether your spirituality makes you more present or less. Does it help you feel more honest or more guarded? Does it help you face discomfort or avoid it? Does it soften your heart or harden it? Spiritual bypassing often hardens the heart, not intentionally, but through suppression. When you suppress pain, you also suppress sensitivity. You become numb. Numbness feels like peace, but it is not. Peace is alive. Numbness is shut down. True surrender keeps sensitivity intact. You may still feel deeply, but you are not drowning. You are aware. You are breathing. You are allowing. This is strength. Buddhism teaches mindfulness as clear seeing. Clear seeing includes pain. It includes discomfort. It includes the messy parts. If your practice excludes certain feelings, it is not clear seeing. It is selective seeing. Selective seeing keeps suffering alive because suffering lives in what you refuse to see. When you turn toward what you avoid, suffering loses its secrecy. It becomes workable. Trusting life without bypassing also means allowing yourself to be confused. Bypassing wants certainty. It wants simple explanations. Everything is meant to be. It's all karma. This is just a lesson. These phrases can sometimes be true, but when used too quickly, they shut down the human process. True surrender allows uncertainty. It allows you to not know. It allows you to sit with questions without forcing answers. This openness is closer to wisdom than quick meaning-making. Buddhism does not require you to interpret every pain. Sometimes pain is just pain. Sometimes loss is just loss. Sometimes the heart hurts and there is no neat story. Accepting this is part of trusting life. Bypassing often avoids vulnerability. It tries to appear strong, it tries to appear unshaken. But true surrender is vulnerable. It admits, this matters to me. It admits, I'm hurting. Vulnerability is not weakness, it is contact with reality. Another difference is how you treat your body. Bypassing often ignores the body's signals. You may meditate while your body is tense, trying to transcend discomfort. True surrender includes the body. You relax into sensation. You listen. You respond. You begin to see that spirituality is not a way to escape pain, but a way to meet it with gentleness. When you meet pain honestly, it moves. When you avoid it, it solidifies. Trusting life without bypassing also changes your relationship with joy. When you don't suppress pain, joy becomes more genuine. You stop forcing positivity. You allow happiness to arise naturally. You stop performing wellness. This honesty creates a quiet confidence. Not the confidence of being above life, but the confidence of being able to meet life. You become less afraid of your own emotions. You stop treating them as threats to your spiritual identity. You see them as weather. They pass through awareness. True surrender is not a concept. It is a direct experience. It is the moment you stop fighting what is here and allow yourself to feel it fully. That feeling may be uncomfortable, but it is honest. And honesty has a healing power that bypassing never can. The path becomes simpler. You breathe, you notice, you allow. You act when action is needed. You rest when rest is needed. You stop using spirituality as armor. Trust grows when you see that you can remain present even in pain. You do not need to escape yourself. You do not need to rush to meaning. You can be here with what is real. This is what it means to trust life without bypassing. You do not float above the human experience. You live it fully with awareness. You stop hiding behind spiritual language and start meeting your life directly. Nothing is avoided here. Nothing is forced. Nothing is performed. Only truth, felt clearly, moment by moment. When spirituality becomes honest and grounded, when it no longer serves as a hiding place, another desire quietly steps forward. It does not announce itself as ego. It presents itself as meaning, as purpose, as the wish to matter in a specific way. A subtle longing to be different, recognized, chosen, or set apart. This longing is easy to miss because it feels noble. You want your life to count. You want your pain to mean something. You want your insight, your growth, your struggles to lead somewhere special. On the surface, this looks like aspiration, but underneath it often carries dissatisfaction with the ordinary. Many people feel an unease they cannot explain. Life is stable. Nothing is particularly wrong. And yet something feels flat. In these moments, the mind begins to search for significance. It whispers that this cannot be all there is, that there must be something more, something bigger, something that sets you apart from the rest. This craving for significance is not arrogance. It usually comes from insecurity, from the fear of being replaceable, from the discomfort of being one among many. The idea of being special offers relief from that discomfort. It promises importance in a world that feels vast and indifferent. Buddhism looks directly at this desire without judgment. It recognizes that the need to be special is another form of attachment to self, a refined one that can survive even after letting go of many obvious ego traps. You may notice this need in subtle ways, feeling disappointed when your efforts go unnoticed, feeling restless when your life feels simple, feeling unseen when your insight is not acknowledged. Even spiritual growth can become a way to stand out. The problem is not uniqueness. Every life is unique by nature. The problem is craving uniqueness as validation. When being special becomes a requirement for satisfaction, ordinary life begins to feel insufficient. This is where dissatisfaction grows quietly. You eat, work, rest, connect, and yet something feels missing. Not because life lacks depth, but because it does not confirm your imagined importance. The mind compares constantly. Others seem more successful, more enlightened, more impactful. Even if you do not envy them, you feel a pressure to keep up, to prove that your path is meaningful too. Buddhism teaches that comparison is rooted in self-centered thinking, not selfishness, but fixation. Attention circles around the self and its position in the world. This fixation narrows perception. You stop seeing life as it is and start measuring it. Craving to be chosen often comes from early experiences. Being praised, singled out, or valued conditionally can shape the belief that love depends on standing out. Later, this belief turns into a constant search for confirmation. You may seek it through achievement, through relationships, through spirituality, or through suffering itself. Pain can become a way to feel special. Being misunderstood can become a badge. Struggle can become identity. This does not mean your pain is fake. It means the meaning attached to it may be carrying extra weight. When suffering becomes a way to feel significant, it becomes harder to let go. Ordinary moments then feel disappointing. Washing dishes, sitting quietly, repeating daily routines. These moments do not feed the need to be special, so the mind disengages from them. Life feels dull not because it lacks richness, but because attention is elsewhere. Buddhism does not promise significance, it promises freedom, and freedom often looks ordinary. It looks like presence without commentary, like peace without applause. Releasing the need to be special means allowing life to be simple, without interpreting simplicity as failure. It means letting go of the belief that meaning must be dramatic or visible. This release can feel threatening at first. If you are not special, then what are you? The mind fears disappearing into sameness, but what actually dissolves is pressure, not self. When you stop trying to stand out, you start to settle in. You engage more fully with what is in front of you. You stop waiting for something extraordinary to justify your existence. Buddhist teachings emphasize suchness, things as they are. A cup is a cup. A breath is a breath. There is no hierarchy in presence. Nothing needs to be elevated to be meaningful. The craving to be chosen often affects relationships. You may want to be the favorite, the most understood, the most important. When this does not happen, resentment appears. You feel overlooked, even when no harm was intended. Releasing this craving allows relationships to breathe. You stop competing for attention. You stop measuring closeness. You enjoy connection without needing to be central. There is also relief in no longer needing a special role. You can show up as you are. You do not have to perform insight or depth. You do not have to justify your place. Buddhism teaches non-self not as erasure, but as freedom from fixation. When you stop clinging to a special self, awareness expands. You feel connected rather than separate. Ordinary life reveals its depth here, not through excitement, but through intimacy. You notice textures, sounds, small kindnesses. These moments were always rich, but they were overlooked while chasing significance. The desire to be special also creates anxiety. You worry about being forgotten, about wasting potential, about not living up to something undefined. This anxiety softens when you release the need to stand out. You stop asking life to prove your value. You stop waiting for recognition before allowing yourself to rest. This does not mean you lose motivation. It means motivation changes. You act because something feels meaningful to do, not because it will define you. Buddhist wisdom points out that the self-seeking significance is never satisfied. There is always someone more accomplished, more visible, more praised. Letting go ends this race. When you stop needing to be special, gratitude grows. Not forced gratitude, but natural appreciation. You see that being alive, breathing, sensing, connecting is already enough. You also become more compassionate. Without the need to distinguish yourself, you feel closer to others. Their struggles no longer threaten your identity. Their success no longer diminishes you. Ordinary life stops feeling like a waiting room. It becomes the place where life actually happens. There is a quiet joy here, not excitement, not pride, just ease. You are not trying to prove anything. You are not trying to be chosen. You are already here. Buddhism does not elevate one person above another. It points to awareness that belongs to no one. When you rest in this awareness, the need to be special fades. You still have preferences. You still have talents. You still have a unique expression, but you are no longer burdened by making them mean something about your worth. Dissatisfaction softens when ordinary moments are allowed to be enough. You stop scanning for something more. You stop feeling left behind by life. Releasing the need to be special also frees creativity. When you are not trying to impress, expression becomes honest. You create, speak, and act from sincerity rather than ambition. This sincerity feels grounding. You are no longer chasing a feeling of importance. You are participating in life as it is. There is dignity in this ordinariness, a quiet dignity that does not need recognition. You carry yourself without comparison. Buddhism teaches that liberation is not found in being exceptional, but in being free from the need to be. When that need falls away, life opens. Nothing dramatic happens. And that is the point. You wake up. You live. You respond. You rest. And for the first time, this feels sufficient. You are no longer waiting to be chosen by life. You are already in it. The subtle dissatisfaction fades, not because life became extraordinary, but because you stopped demanding that it be. When the need to be special softens, ordinary life starts to feel lighter. You stop chasing proof that you matter. You stop asking each moment to impress you, and yet, even in this simplicity, the mind still searches for something solid. Not significance this time, but certainty, emotional certainty, the kind that makes you say, I know exactly what this means, and I know exactly how I feel, and I know what will happen next. Emotional certainty feels like safety. It feels like standing on firm ground. When emotions are unclear, the mind gets uncomfortable. It wants to label quickly, decide quickly, conclude quickly. It wants to close the case. And the faster it closes the case, the less it has to sit in the open space of not knowing. That open space can feel like exposure. It can feel like vulnerability. It can feel like you are floating without support. So the mind creates conclusions, not always because they are true, but because they are calming. This is why people cling to emotional conclusions even when those conclusions hurt them. A common example is when you feel a wave of sadness, and the mind immediately turns it into a story. I'm not okay. Nothing ever works. I'm falling back again. The emotion was a temporary movement in the body. The conclusion turns it into identity. Or when someone disappoints you and the mind concludes, people can't be trusted. They never cared. I always get hurt. The event was real, but the conclusion is global. It freezes life into a fixed belief. Buddhism values openness because openness keeps reality fluid. Emotional certainty often freezes it. Emotional certainty is not just about predicting the future, it is also about making quick meaning out of feelings. The mind wants to interpret emotions as messages that must be obeyed. If you feel anxious, you assume danger. If you feel lonely, you assume abandonment. If you feel irritated, you assume someone is wrong. Feelings become verdicts. But feelings are not verdicts, they are experiences. They arise for many reasons, including the body's state, old memories, sleep, stress, and conditioning. When you treat feelings as facts, you lose flexibility. Buddhism teaches that emotions are impermanent. They arise, stay for a time, and pass. When you lock them into conclusions, you block their natural movement. You turn a passing wave into a fixed wall. Many people think the goal of inner peace is to reach emotional certainty, to always know what they feel and why. But Buddhism points to something deeper. It points to the ability to stay open, even when feelings are unclear. Openness means you allow emotions to exist without rushing to interpret them. You feel sadness without turning it into a story about your life. You feel anxiety without turning it into a prophecy. You feel anger without turning it into a judgment of your character. This openness is not confusion, it is maturity. It recognizes that the mind often tries to close things too quickly. Emotional certainty is tempting because it gives a sense of control. If you can name the emotion and its meaning, you feel like you can manage it. But often, the certainty is not accurate. It is just fast. Fast conclusions reduce discomfort in the short term, but they increase suffering in the long term, because each conclusion becomes a belief. And beliefs shape perception. If you conclude, "I'm always alone," you begin to notice proof of it everywhere. If you conclude, "People always leave," you interpret distance as abandonment. If you conclude, "I'm broken," you interpret difficulty as failure. The mind begins to build a world that matches its conclusions. This is how emotional certainty becomes a trap. It creates a self-fulfilling reality. Buddhism teaches mindful awareness as a way out. Mindfulness is not emotional analysis. It is direct observation. You notice what is present without rushing to define it. You might notice tightness in the chest, heat in the face, a heavy feeling in the stomach, thoughts moving quickly. You stay close to the raw experience. You do not immediately translate it into, "This means my life is going wrong." This simple shift changes everything, because when you stay with experience, it moves. When you lock it into meaning, it solidifies. Emotional certainty also affects relationships. When you conclude quickly, you stop being curious about others. You decide you know their intention. You decide you know what they feel. You decide you know where things are going. This certainty creates distance. It replaces communication with assumption. It replaces listening with interpretation. Buddhism values openness because openness allows connection. When you stay open, you can ask questions, you can clarify, you can respond to what is real rather than what you assumed. Emotional certainty often comes from old patterns. If you were hurt before, you may conclude quickly to protect yourself. You see signs of danger and rush to judgment. You label someone as unsafe before learning who they are. This is understandable. The nervous system tries to prevent pain, but protection through quick conclusion can become a prison. You avoid risk, but you also avoid intimacy. Openness does not mean being naive. It means holding your interpretations lightly. You notice your reaction, but you don't worship it. You allow room for new information. Buddhist teachings often speak about beginner's mind. This is the mind that meets each moment fresh, without heavy conclusions. Beginner's mind does not mean ignorance. It means openness. When you practice beginner's mind, you notice how many emotional conclusions are habits. You see the mind reaching for familiar stories. You catch the impulse to say, "Here we go again." You do not suppress it. You simply do not build a house inside it. This practice can feel uncomfortable at first because emotional certainty is addictive. It gives the ego a role. The ego loves certainty because it loves being right. When you stay open, the ego feels less in control. It doesn't get to declare final truths. It doesn't get to define the moment. This can feel like losing ground, but what you gain is freedom. You gain the ability to change your mind. You gain the ability to allow feelings to pass without defining you. Openness also reduces inner conflict. Many people fight themselves because they want emotional certainty. They want to feel the right way. When emotions don't match their ideals, they panic. They say, "Why am I still sad? Why am I still anxious? I thought I was over this." These questions are fueled by the belief that feelings should be predictable and linear. But emotions are not linear. They are alive. Buddhism invites you to stop demanding emotional consistency. You allow your inner world to move like weather. Some days clear, some days cloudy. Neither day defines you. Letting go of emotional certainty also allows creativity. When you are not trapped in fixed conclusions, you can respond more intelligently. You can explore options rather than repeating patterns. You may feel uncertainty in a relationship, and instead of concluding, "This is doomed," you might stay open and communicate. You may feel discomfort at work, and instead of concluding, "I'm failing," you might explore what needs adjustment. Openness creates possibilities. Emotional certainty often comes with emotional labeling that is too heavy. You label a feeling as depression when it may be exhaustion. You label a feeling as rejection when it may be misunderstanding. You label a feeling as anger when it may be fear. Buddhism encourages careful observation. You look deeper. You notice that emotions are often mixed. Sadness can contain love. Anger can contain hurt. Anxiety can contain excitement. When you rush to certainty, you miss this complexity. Openness respects complexity. It allows you to feel multiple things at once without needing to resolve them into one story. This is a kind of inner honesty. You stop forcing simple narratives. You allow your experience to be layered. Letting go of emotional certainty also softens the urge to control others. When you conclude you know what someone should do, you become rigid. When you stay open, you recognize that people are complex too. This openness supports compassion, because compassion requires humility. It requires admitting that you don't fully know what others carry. Buddhism values this humility because it reduces arrogance and reduces suffering. When you don't need to be certain, you don't need to fight reality into your conclusions. You may still have preferences. You may still make decisions. Openness does not mean indecision. It means you decide without pretending your emotional conclusions are absolute truth. A powerful practice here is to notice the phrase, "I know." When you feel upset, the mind often says, "I know what this means." When you catch this, you pause. You ask, "Do I know, or am I trying to feel safe?" This question creates space. In that space, the nervous system relaxes. You stop escalating a temporary feeling into a permanent belief. Over time, you begin to trust your capacity to stay open. You realize that not knowing does not harm you. It actually protects you from false stories. This trust changes how you experience emotions. Feelings become signals, not verdicts. They become movement, not identity. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises when we cling. Emotional certainty is another form of clinging. You cling to interpretation. You cling to conclusion. You cling to the comfort of having an answer. When you release this clinging, life feels more spacious. You are less trapped by your own mind. You are more responsive, less reactive. Even difficult emotions become easier to hold because you stop turning them into permanent statements about your life. The heart becomes more flexible. The mind becomes softer. You do not need to force closure on every feeling. Openness becomes a kind of quiet courage. You're willing to be uncertain. You're willing to feel without rushing to define. You're willing to let life show you what it is, rather than deciding too quickly. This is why Buddhism values openness over emotional conclusions. Because openness keeps you close to truth, and truth is always moving. You do not need emotional certainty to be steady. You need presence. And presence does not require a conclusion. When emotional certainty loosens, when you stop rushing to name and define every feeling, something unfamiliar appears. It is not another emotion. It is not another insight. It is a gap, a pause, a quiet space where answers used to rush in. At first, this space can feel uncomfortable. The mind is used to movement, to explanation, to clarity through words. Silence feels like something is missing. This is where a deeper habit becomes visible, the habit of questioning everything until it feels safe, the habit of believing that understanding must come in the form of answers. When answers do not arrive, the mind keeps searching. It asks why, it asks how, it asks what it should do next. Questions stack on top of each other, creating noise that feels productive but rarely brings peace. Most people trust answers more than silence. Answers feel solid, they give direction, they make you feel in control. Silence feels empty, unfinished, even threatening. It feels like standing without support. So the mind fills it quickly, often without noticing. But Buddhism points to a different kind of wisdom, a wisdom that does not come from accumulating explanations, but from allowing questions to dissolve. Not because they were answered, but because they were no longer needed. The mind is trained to solve. From an early age, questions are rewarded. Curiosity is encouraged. Answers are praised. Over time, this creates an assumption that clarity always comes through thinking. When something feels unresolved, the natural response is to ask more questions. This works well in practical matters. But when applied to inner life, it often creates suffering. Some questions cannot be answered in a way that satisfies the heart. Why did this happen? Why did they change? Why do I feel this way? Why am I still affected? These questions circle endlessly because they are not meant to be solved intellectually. The mind keeps asking because it believes answers will bring relief. But relief does not always come from knowing. Sometimes it comes from stopping. Silence is often misunderstood as absence, but in Buddhist understanding, silence is presence without commentary. It is awareness resting in itself, without trying to explain or control experience. When you trust silence, you stop forcing meaning onto everything. You allow life to be felt rather than interpreted. This is not passive, it is deeply attentive. At first, silence can feel unsettling because it removes distraction. Without answers to lean on, you are left with sensation, emotion, breath. The body becomes louder. The nervous system reveals its patterns. This can feel overwhelming if you are not used to staying. So the mind jumps back in. It starts analyzing again. It starts narrating. It starts building theories. This is not wrong. It is habitual. But wisdom grows when you notice this impulse and choose not to follow it every time. Buddhism teaches that questions are not the enemy. Attachment to questions is. When you believe you must resolve everything mentally, you create pressure. You turn inner life into a puzzle that must be completed. This pressure keeps the system activated. You are always leaning forward, searching for the next insight. Even reflection becomes restless. Trusting silence means allowing yourself to not know. This is difficult because not knowing feels like vulnerability. It feels like giving up control, but control through answers is often an illusion. You may understand something intellectually and still suffer emotionally. Silence works differently. It does not explain pain, it holds it. It does not justify experience, it allows it. When you sit with silence, questions gradually lose urgency. Not because they were answered, but because they stop feeling relevant. The energy that fueled them dissolves. This does not happen through force. You cannot command the mind to be silent. You simply stop feeding every question with attention. You let them arise and pass without engaging. Over time, the mind learns that not every question needs a response. It learns that safety does not depend on explanation. The nervous system begins to settle. There is also a subtle humility in silence. You accept that not everything is meant to be understood by you. You release the belief that your mind must grasp life completely. This humility is not defeat. It is realism. Buddhism often points to the limits of conceptual thinking. Concepts are useful, but they are not reality. They are maps, not territory. When you mistake the map for the experience, you miss what is alive. Silence returns you to the territory. You feel the breath rather than thinking about breathing. You sense the body rather than analyzing sensation. You notice emotions without labeling them. This direct contact has a calming effect. You stop living one step removed from experience. You are here without commentary. Many people fear silence because they believe it will swallow them, that without thoughts they will disappear. But silence does not erase you. It reveals you as awareness rather than story. In silence, you notice that you still exist even when nothing is being explained. This realization is deeply stabilizing. Trusting silence also changes how you relate to problems. Instead of immediately trying to solve them, you allow them to sit. You notice what they feel like in the body. You listen. Often, clarity emerges on its own when the mind stops interfering, not as a dramatic insight, but as a simple sense of what needs to be done. This clarity is quieter than thought, but more reliable. Buddhist teachings emphasize that wisdom is not something you add. It is something that appears when obstruction is removed. Constant questioning can be an obstruction. When questions dissolve, attention frees up. You are no longer busy managing uncertainty. You are present with what is. This presence allows emotions to complete their cycle. Feelings that were stuck because they were constantly being analyzed begin to move. Grief softens, anxiety settles. Not because it was explained away, but because it was allowed. Silence also changes how you listen to others. When you are not rushing to respond or interpret, you hear more. You notice tone. You notice pauses. You become attuned to what is not said. This deepens connection. You stop needing to fill gaps in conversation. You allow space. Others feel met without being dissected. Trusting silence does not mean you stop speaking. It means you speak from a quieter place. Words come with less urgency, less need to be right, less need to convince. There is a confidence in silence that does not come from answers. It comes from familiarity with not knowing. You realize you can function without constant explanation. This confidence is different from certainty. Certainty is rigid. Silence is flexible. Certainty closes. Silence opens. Buddhism values this openness because it allows insight to arise naturally. When the mind is quiet, patterns become visible. You see connections without forcing them. You may notice that after sitting in silence, a question that once felt urgent no longer matters. Or it resolves itself without conscious effort, or it remains unanswered, but no longer painful. This is the difference between intellectual resolution and experiential resolution. One satisfies the mind, the other satisfies the whole system. Trusting silence also reduces mental fatigue. Constant questioning is exhausting. The mind never rests. Silence allows rest without shutting down awareness. In silence, you are not trying to improve yourself, understand yourself, or fix yourself. You are simply here. This simplicity is deeply nourishing. Many people associate silence with emptiness in the negative sense. But Buddhist emptiness is fullness without fixation. It is space where everything can arise and pass. When you stop filling that space with questions, life flows more freely. You are less caught in mental loops. You respond more spontaneously. Silence also reveals the difference between curiosity and compulsion. Curiosity is light. Compulsion is heavy. When questioning becomes compulsive, it signals fear. Trusting silence allows fear to be felt without being interrogated. Fear moves through more easily when it is not surrounded by questions. There is also grief that can surface in silence. Grief for things that will never be fully understood. Grief for answers that will never come. Allowing this grief is part of surrender. Buddhism does not promise complete understanding. It promises freedom from suffering. These are not the same. Freedom often comes when you stop demanding answers from life. When you allow mystery to exist without trying to solve it. Mystery is not a failure of understanding. It is a condition of being alive. Trying to eliminate it creates suffering. When you trust silence, you make peace with mystery. You stop arguing with uncertainty. You stop treating not knowing as a problem. This peace does not make you passive. It makes you responsive. You act when action is clear. You wait when it is not. You learn to recognize the difference between confusion and openness. Confusion is agitation. Openness is calm. Silence supports openness. Over time, you may notice that wisdom feels less like answers and more like alignment. Things feel right without needing explanation. Decisions feel settled without analysis. This does not mean you never think again. It means thinking no longer dominates. It takes its proper place. Trusting silence is a radical act in a world that values noise. It requires courage to sit without answers. But this courage is rewarded with depth. You begin to sense that life does not need to be constantly understood to be lived well. Experience unfolds, and you unfold with it. Questions still arise, but they do not own you. Answers still appear, but you do not cling to them. Silence becomes a companion rather than a void. You trust it to hold what words cannot. And in that trust, wisdom appears quietly, without announcing itself, without being asked. When silence is no longer something you rush to fill, another discomfort often steps forward. It doesn't arrive as pain or fear. It arrives as flatness, as restlessness without a story, as the sense that nothing is happening. This is the moment most people try to escape. This is boredom. Boredom is rarely taken seriously. It is treated as a problem to solve, a state to avoid, a sign that something is wrong. The moment boredom appears, the hand reaches for stimulation, a screen, a thought, a plan, anything to bring movement back. And yet beneath boredom is something most people never touch, because they leave too quickly. Boredom is not emptiness, it is resistance to stillness. When the mind no longer has answers to chase and silence is allowed, boredom appears as the next line of defense. It is the mind saying, "This isn't enough. This moment should offer more." That complaint feels small, but it carries a deep assumption that presence must be entertaining to be valuable. Buddhism sees boredom differently. It does not treat boredom as a failure of the moment, but as a doorway the mind avoids because it leads somewhere unfamiliar. Boredom arises when stimulation drops and attention has nowhere to go. The usual hooks are gone, no drama, no urgency, no emotional charge, just simple experience. The mind panics slightly here because it has been trained to equate movement with meaning. This panic often shows up as irritation. You feel restless, you feel distracted, you feel an urge to do something, anything, not because something needs to be done, but because the mind is uncomfortable with being unoccupied. This discomfort is important. It reveals how addicted the mind is to stimulation. Not pleasure, but stimulation. Even negative stimulation feels better than none. Worry, planning, replaying conversations, imagining problems. These are not signs of a troubled mind, they are signs of a bored one avoiding stillness. Buddhism teaches that boredom is not the absence of meaning, but the absence of distraction. When distractions fall away, raw experience is left behind. Breath, sensation, sound, awareness itself. To a mind used to noise, this feels dull. But dullness is a judgment, not a fact. When you stay with boredom instead of resisting it, something subtle begins to shift. The urge to escape rises and falls. The restlessness peaks and then softens. What remains is a quieter attention, no longer pulled outward. At first, this attention feels empty. But if you stay, it deepens. Boredom is often the surface layer of presence. Most people never pass through it because they mistake it for a dead end. In reality, it is a threshold. The resistance to boredom comes from a belief that life should constantly provide interest. This belief creates suffering because life is not designed to entertain you, it is designed to unfold. When you expect stimulation, ordinary moments feel lacking. Waiting feels unbearable. Simplicity feels like deprivation. You miss much of life because you are waiting for it to become more exciting. Buddhism points out that craving stimulation is just another form of craving. It keeps the mind restless. It prevents contentment. Even pleasurable experiences lose depth because they are consumed quickly, always compared to the next thing. Letting go of resistance to boredom does not mean forcing yourself to like it. It means not running from it. You allow the sensation of boredom to be felt in the body, the heaviness, the restlessness, the vague dissatisfaction. When you feel boredom directly without commentary, it begins to change. It becomes sensation rather than story. And sensation moves. This is where presence opens. Under boredom is aliveness that does not shout. It hums. It is subtle. The rise and fall of breath, the play of light, the feeling of sitting. These things were always here, but they were overshadowed by the demand for more. Deep presence is not dramatic. It does not excite the mind. It satisfies something deeper. Buddhism teaches mindfulness as attention without preference. You notice what is here without asking it to entertain you. This is a radical shift. It removes the consumer mindset from experience. When you stop demanding that the moment perform, you begin to see its texture. Stillness reveals layers. Silence reveals sound. Simplicity reveals richness. Boredom often carries a sense of time dragging. Minutes feel longer. This happens because the mind is no longer skipping ahead. It is actually here. Accustomed to jumping, it interprets staying as slowness. But slowness is not a problem. It is a recalibration. When you allow time to feel slow, the nervous system relaxes. You stop racing internally. You stop compressing experience. Life begins to feel fuller because you are not rushing through it. Many people fear boredom because they fear what will surface underneath it. Old emotions, unresolved feelings, a sense of emptiness. This fear keeps them busy. Buddhism does not rush past this fear. It invites you to stay, to see that what surfaces is not dangerous. It is simply what was already there, waiting for attention. When boredom is allowed, creativity often follows. Not the frantic kind, but a quiet curiosity. Ideas arise naturally. Insight appears without effort. This happens because the mind is no longer overloaded. Boredom clears space. This space allows presence to deepen. You become less reactive, less impatient, less dependent on stimulation to feel alive. The world begins to feel less exhausting. You no longer need constant input. Silence becomes nourishing. Waiting becomes neutral. Stillness becomes familiar. Buddhism values this familiarity because it supports equanimity. You are not thrown off balance by lack of excitement. You are not constantly seeking distraction. Letting go of resistance to boredom also changes how you relate to discomfort. You stop escaping mild unease. This builds tolerance. You become less fragile. This does not make life dull, it makes it steady. When boredom is no longer an enemy, you stop fighting large parts of your day. Routine becomes workable, repetition becomes grounding. You stop needing every moment to be meaningful in an obvious way. Meaning begins to arise quietly, through presence rather than stimulation. Boredom often hides judgment. This moment isn't enough. Letting go of boredom means letting go of that judgment. You stop ranking moments. You stop demanding peak experiences. Buddhism teaches that awakening is not found in special states. It is found in ordinary awareness. Boredom is often the doorway to that awareness because it strips away fantasy. Staying with boredom reveals how much of suffering comes from impatience. The inability to be with what is simple. When impatience softens, suffering decreases. You may notice that boredom feels different depending on how you meet it. When resisted, it feels heavy and irritating. When allowed, it becomes spacious and calm. This shift is not mental, it is experiential. You feel it in the body. Letting go of resistance to boredom also changes how you use technology. You stop reaching automatically. You choose rather than react. This restores agency. Life becomes less fragmented. Attention becomes less scattered. You feel more whole. Boredom is also closely tied to identity. When nothing is happening, the self feels less defined. There is no role to play, no task to perform. This can feel threatening. Buddhism teaches that this threat is imaginary. You do not disappear when you are not doing. You become more present. Presence does not require action. It requires openness. When you stop resisting boredom, you stop filling every gap. You allow pauses. You allow silence in conversation. You allow moments without purpose. These pauses create depth. You begin to notice that boredom often passes quickly when not fed. It arises, peaks, and dissolves, like any other state. The habit of escaping boredom weakens. You trust stillness more. You trust yourself more. This trust creates a stable inner environment. You are less dependent on external stimulation for regulation. Deep presence is not something you achieve. It emerges when resistance falls away. Boredom is one of the last resistances because it feels pointless, but nothing is pointless when fully experienced. Buddhism does not ask you to seek boredom. It asks you not to fear it. When boredom comes, you stay, you breathe, you feel. In that staying, something opens that cannot be accessed through excitement, a quiet joy, not pleasure, not thrill, just ease. This ease does not need entertainment. It does not need validation. It rests. Letting go of resistance to boredom allows life to slow down enough for you to actually meet it. And when you do, presence deepens naturally, without effort, without force, without needing anything to be different. As resistance to boredom falls away, something unexpected often happens. The mind, no longer distracted, turns toward a new goal. It says, "Now I should be calm." It says, "Now I should feel peaceful." What once felt like freedom slowly becomes another standard to meet, and without noticing, the search begins again. There is a quiet pressure in wanting inner peace. It feels gentle, even wise. You want stillness, you want ease, you want a calm mind. But the moment peace becomes something you must achieve, tension returns. The search itself disturbs what it is trying to find. Many people believe inner peace is a permanent state, a finish line, a place where discomfort no longer appears. This belief turns peace into an object, something to hold on to and protect. Buddhism points out that the moment you try to hold peace, you lose it. Chasing calm creates conflict because it divides experience. There is what is happening now, and there is what should be happening instead. Any feeling that does not match the ideal is treated as a problem. Restlessness becomes failure, sadness becomes regression, anger becomes a sign you are doing something wrong. This creates an inner struggle. Part of you wants to be peaceful, another part of you is not. The peaceful part tries to silence the rest. The restless part resists, and the conflict grows. Buddhism does not define peace as the absence of disturbance. It defines peace as the absence of resistance to disturbance. This difference is subtle, but everything changes because of it. When you chase calm, you monitor yourself constantly. You check your thoughts, you check your emotions, you ask whether you are relaxed enough. This monitoring creates pressure. The nervous system feels watched. Watched systems do not relax. You may notice how frustration arises when calm does not arrive quickly. You meditate and feel impatient. You slow down and feel agitated. Instead of peace, you find irritation at not being peaceful. This irritation is not a personal failure. It is the natural result of attachment. Non-attachment to inner peace means you stop treating calm as a requirement. You allow whatever state is present without trying to replace it. This does not mean you like discomfort. It means you stop fighting it. The moment you stop fighting, something shifts. The body feels less tense. The mind stops arguing. The feeling that was unwanted begins to soften on its own. Inner peace is not something you manufacture. It is something that remains when resistance ends. Buddhism teaches that all mental states arise and pass. Calm arises, calm passes. Restlessness arises, restlessness passes. Suffering begins when you demand one state and reject another. Many people believe that spiritual practice is about staying calm no matter what. This belief creates shame when calm is lost. You think you are failing. You think you should know better by now. This shame fuels more tension. Non-attachment removes shame from the process. You no longer measure yourself by how calm you feel. You measure yourself by how honest you are with what is present. When honesty replaces control, peace has room to appear. Chasing calm often leads to suppression. You push emotions down to maintain a peaceful image. You smile through discomfort. You avoid conflict. You deny anger. On the surface, things look calm. Inside, pressure builds. Suppressed emotions do not disappear. They wait. They show up as fatigue, anxiety, numbness, or sudden emotional release. What looked like peace was actually avoidance. Buddhism encourages inclusion instead of suppression. Peace does not come from excluding difficult states. It comes from including them without resistance. When anger is allowed, it moves. When sadness is allowed, it softens. When fear is allowed, it settles. The allowance is what heals, not the removal. Non-attachment to peace also changes how you meditate or reflect. You stop using practice as a way to escape yourself. You stop sitting to feel better. You sit to be present. This presence is neutral. It does not favor calm over agitation. It notices both. And in that noticing, the system regulates naturally. The body knows how to settle when it is not being pushed. The mind knows how to quiet when it is not being judged. Peace emerges not because you demanded it, but because you stopped interfering. There is also a subtle ego in chasing calm. The ego wants to be the kind of person who is unshaken, who rises above emotion, who remains centered at all times. This image becomes another identity to protect. When you attach to being peaceful, losing peace feels like losing status. You feel embarrassed by your own reactions. You judge yourself for being human. Non-attachment dissolves this identity. You allow yourself to be affected by life without interpreting it as weakness. You respond rather than react, not because you are calm, but because you are present. Buddhism teaches equanimity, not constant calm. Equanimity is the ability to remain open in all states. Calm may arise within equanimity, but it is not required. This understanding reduces fear of disturbance. You no longer panic when emotions arise. You no longer rush to fix yourself. You trust the process. Peace becomes a side effect rather than a goal. Chasing calm also narrows life. You avoid situations that might unsettle you. You limit expression. You choose safety over honesty. Over time, life feels smaller. Non-attachment allows fullness. You engage with life even when it is messy. You allow excitement, grief, passion, and uncertainty. Peace does not require you to be untouched. It requires you to be unafraid of being touched. There is also a misunderstanding that peace must be quiet. But peace can coexist with movement. You can feel peaceful while acting, speaking, even disagreeing. Peace is not silence. It is lack of inner conflict. Inner conflict arises when you fight yourself. When you accept yourself, even in agitation, conflict decreases. This acceptance does not mean resignation. It means clarity. You see what is present without trying to make it something else. Many people feel guilty for wanting peace. They think they are being selfish. But the deeper issue is not wanting peace. It is demanding peace on your terms. When peace is demanded, it becomes conditional. When conditions are not met, frustration grows. Buddhism invites unconditional presence instead. You are here whether calm arises or not. You do not postpone presence until peace arrives. Over time, this unconditional presence stabilizes the system. The nervous system learns that it is safe to feel. Safety allows relaxation. Relaxation allows peace. Peace that emerges naturally is different from peace that is chased. It is quieter, less dramatic. It does not need to be defended. You may notice moments of calm appearing unexpectedly, in the middle of activity, in the middle of noise, in the middle of uncertainty. These moments feel genuine because they are not forced. They come and go. And you let them go. Non-attachment to peace means you do not cling to calm when it appears. You enjoy it, but you do not panic when it fades. You understand its nature. This understanding removes fear. You are no longer afraid of losing peace because you are not relying on it for stability. Stability comes from trust in your capacity to meet experience. Buddhism teaches that liberation is not found in perfect states. It is found in freedom from clinging to states. When you stop chasing calm, the inner battle ends. There is no longer a part of you policing another part. Energy returns, attention softens. You become less tense without trying, less reactive without forcing, less fragmented without effort. Peace stops being a destination and becomes a background condition, not always noticeable, not always present, but not absent either. It is the quiet that remains when you stop arguing with yourself. You are no longer asking, "Am I peaceful enough?" You are simply here. And in that simplicity, peace is free to arise on its own, stay as long as it stays, and leave without taking anything with it. As the chase for inner peace loosens, as calm is no longer treated like a fragile achievement, another belief quietly comes into focus. It does not feel aggressive or harsh. It feels caring, responsible, even loving. It says that something inside you still needs to be fixed, healed, or rescued. That if you just work a little more on yourself, everything will finally be okay. This belief is deeply ingrained. It often begins early in life when pain is misunderstood and emotions are handled through correction rather than understanding. Over time, you learn to see yourself as a problem that needs improvement. Even when life is going well, part of you stays alert, scanning for what still needs fixing. The idea that you need to be saved sounds dramatic, but it rarely appears that way internally. It shows up as constant self-monitoring, as a quiet pressure to improve, as the feeling that who you are right now is not quite enough to be at rest. Liberation is imagined as a future version of yourself that is calmer, wiser, more stable. This creates a split. There is the self you are and the self you are trying to become, the one doing the fixing and the one being fixed. This split feels productive, but it is exhausting. You are never allowed to arrive, because arrival would mean nothing is wrong. Buddhism points gently but clearly at this pattern. Suffering continues not because you are broken, but because you believe you are. The belief itself becomes the source of struggle. The self that needs to be saved is built from good intentions. You want relief. You want clarity. You want to stop hurting. But when the desire to heal turns into a constant project, it keeps you in a state of deficiency. You are always one step away from being okay. This belief creates urgency. You feel like time is running out, like you should be further along, like you are failing at something invisible. Even rest becomes conditional. You rest so you can get back to fixing. Buddhism does not teach liberation through fixing. It teaches liberation through seeing. Seeing how the mind creates problems out of experience. Seeing how identity forms around struggle. seeing how effort itself can be the obstacle. When you try to fix yourself, you treat your inner life like a machine. Something is wrong, something needs adjustment. But the inner world is not mechanical. It is alive. It responds to attention, not control. Seeing is different from fixing. Fixing implies judgment. Seeing implies curiosity. When you see an emotion without trying to change it, something relaxes. The emotion no longer needs to defend itself. The self that needs to be saved often shows up during difficulty. When you feel anxious, the mind says, "I need to get rid of this." When you feel sad, it says, "I shouldn't still feel this way." When you feel confused, it says, "I need to figure myself out." Each statement reinforces the idea that your current state is unacceptable. This rejection keeps emotions stuck. Emotions move when they are allowed, not when they are corrected. Fixing tightens, seeing opens. Buddhism teaches mindfulness not as a technique to improve yourself, but as a way to understand experience. You notice thoughts without arguing with them. You notice feelings without labeling them as problems. You notice sensations without trying to escape them. This noticing reveals something important. The self you are trying to fix is not stable. It changes from moment to moment. Sometimes you feel strong, sometimes fragile, sometimes clear, sometimes confused. Which version is the real one? The idea that there is a core self that must be saved assumes there is something fixed underneath. Buddhism challenges this assumption. What you call self is a collection of habits, thoughts, memories, and reactions. There is no single entity to rescue. This realization can feel unsettling at first. If there is no self to save, then what are you doing all this work for? The answer is simple and radical. You are not here to perfect yourself. You are here to wake up to what is already happening. Waking up does not mean becoming better. It means becoming aware. Aware of how suffering is created. Aware of how attachment forms. Aware of how resistance appears. This awareness loosens suffering naturally. The self that needs to be saved often carries a hidden fear. The fear that if you stop trying, everything will fall apart. That you will become lazy, careless, or overwhelmed. But this fear comes from confusing control with care. True care does not push, it listens, it responds. When you stop fixing yourself, you do not stop caring, you start caring differently. You begin to ask, what is actually happening right now, instead of, how do I get rid of this? This question invites presence instead of pressure. Presence has a stabilizing effect. When you are present, emotions feel less threatening. Thoughts feel less authoritative. You stop believing every story about yourself. The self that needs saving is often reinforced by comparison. You see others who seem more grounded, more healed, more together. You conclude that you are behind. This comparison fuels the fixing mindset. Buddhism points out that comparison is another form of illusion. You never see the full inner life of others. You only see surfaces. Using those surfaces to judge yourself deepens suffering. Releasing the self that needs to be saved allows compassion to turn inward. You stop treating yourself as a project. You treat yourself as a living being. This compassion is not indulgence. It does not excuse harmful behavior. It simply removes hostility from the relationship with yourself. Change happens more easily without hostility. You may notice resistance to this idea. Part of you believes that struggle is necessary, that without pressure, nothing will improve. But look closely. How much has pressure actually helped? Often, pressure creates short-term compliance and long-term burnout. Awareness creates sustainable change. Seeing yourself clearly means seeing both pain and resilience. It means recognizing that you have survived without fixing everything, that life has carried you even when you were confused. Buddhism emphasizes direct experience over belief. You do not have to believe that you are whole. You simply observe what happens when you stop trying to fix yourself. What often happens is relief, not dramatic relief, but subtle. The body relaxes. The breath deepens. The mind quiets slightly. This is not because problems vanished, but because resistance eased. The self that needs to be saved also tends to seek external saviors, teachers, methods, philosophies, practices. These can be helpful, but when used to escape self-trust, they reinforce dependence. Buddhism encourages guidance, not dependence. A teacher points, but you see for yourself. A practice supports awareness, but you do the noticing. Liberation does not come from being rescued. It comes from recognizing that there was never anything fundamentally wrong. This does not mean ignoring trauma or difficulty. It means approaching them with understanding rather than judgment. Trauma needs care, not correction. Seeing trauma clearly includes seeing how the body holds it, how reactions form, how patterns repeat. This seeing allows integration. Fixing often re-traumatizes by invalidating experience. The self that needs to be saved often believes that liberation will feel like perfection, like never being triggered again, like always responding wisely. Buddhism offers a more realistic picture. Liberation feels like flexibility, like being able to be triggered without collapsing, like noticing patterns without being owned by them, like responding with awareness rather than habit. This flexibility comes from seeing, not fixing. When you see a pattern clearly, you do not need to fight it. Fighting strengthens it. Seeing weakens it. You may notice that when you stop trying to save yourself, life feels more approachable. You stop being at war with your inner world. You stop treating discomfort as an emergency. This does not make life painless. It makes it workable. Releasing the self that needs to be saved also changes your relationship with time. You stop rushing toward a better version of yourself. You stop postponing acceptance. You allow growth to unfold without force. This unfolding is uneven. Some days feel open. Some days feel heavy. You stop using this fluctuation as evidence of failure. Buddhism teaches that conditions change constantly. Expecting linear progress is another form of clinging. When you stop fixing, you start listening. To the body, to emotion, to intuition. This listening brings wisdom that effort cannot produce. You may still learn, you may still practice. But practice is no longer a rescue mission. It is an exploration. Exploration is lighter than rescue. It does not carry the same urgency. It invites curiosity. Curiosity softens the nervous system. It allows learning without fear. The self that needs to be saved often feels alone, as if it must do everything itself. Seeing reveals interdependence. You notice support everywhere. Breath supports you. Gravity supports you. Others support you. You stop feeling like you must carry yourself alone. Liberation in Buddhism is often described as seeing things as they are, not as they should be, not as you wish they were, just as they are. When you see clearly, clinging falls away naturally. You do not need to pry it loose. Releasing the self that needs to be saved is not giving up on growth. It is giving up on violence toward yourself. You stop saying, I must be different to be okay. You start saying, I can be with this. This shift changes everything.